stallion on a stallion with the first black battalion of another.
All right, good morning and welcome everyone to Next Gen Policy's third annual Free My Future Student Debt Summit 2021. I'm excited to welcome you all to day 2 of the summit. My name is Samantha Sang and I'm the Legislative Manager and Policy Advisor here at Next Gen Policy. I'll be your MC for this last day of FMF 2021. And in case anyone wasn't able to make it yesterday, Next Gen Policy, we are a nonprofit political advocacy organization, and we fight for progressive policy change to address environmental, social, racial, and economic inequities in California through justice-centered legislative advocacy, grassroots partnerships, and democratic civic engagement. And again, we do want to take some time to recognize and thank our FMF 2021 Summit partners who helped make it all possible. So that's Consumer Reports, Student Borrower Protection Center, Student Debt Crisis Center, and Young Invincibles, and also YI Advisors for helping us behind the scenes. As we get started around going today, I just want to do some quick reminders about engaging throughout the summit. We are going to be asking for audience questions, and we are hopeful that everyone please be respectful when you're using the Q&A feature here on Zoom or the chat. As always, Free My Future is intended to be a safe and inclusive space. So again, we ask that if you use the chat or Q&A feature, please keep your comments and questions respectful and relevant to today's topics. Moving right along to our schedule of events. For today, we're hoping to get to many more of your questions, as we're going to be starting off with a Q&A from our opening guest speaker. Then we're going to be chatting with you all about some simple and easy actions to get involved in advocacy as a student borrower. And then you're going to hear from some current college students directly about the cost of college. And we'll definitely end the day with a great student debt workshop to get you all ready for 2022. All right, so let's get started and jump into our first event of the day. All right, so it's my pleasure to introduce our opening guest speaker today, Bonnie Littrell, the Student Loan Ombudsman at the U.S. Department of Education. Prior to joining the Office of Federal Student Aid, Bonnie served as Director of Research and Advocacy at the Student Borrower Protection Center, a nonprofit dedicated to ending the student debt crisis. Bonnie previously worked in the Office for Students and Young Consumers at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, where she specialized in student loan servicing compliance and consumer complaint data. Bonnie led the Bureau's work on servicing compliance under the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, and her work identifying consumer harm to borrowers pursuing PSLF led to Congress dedicating $700 million in 2018 to expand the program. Bonnie received a bachelor's in economics from the University of Texas at Dallas and a JD from the University of Virginia School of Law. Bonnie, do we have you on the line?
Hello, and thank you for having me. I'm honored to join you all today as Next Gen Policy continues its tradition of bringing together the leading voices who are shaping the future for student loan borrowers. Through the tireless efforts of California's advocacy community, including Next Gen, Student Debt Crisis Center, Young Invincibles, Consumer Reports, and countless others, California now boasts some of the most comprehensive protections for student loan borrowers this country has ever seen. I'm honored to be here because the actions and ideas you share today will set the tone for the future of the student loan market. Time and again, I've seen how the people in this room were the driving force behind the changes that quite literally moved entire markets. For example, in 2016, with the support of social workers, teachers, and more, California was among the first waves of states to enact a licensing regime for student loan servicers, bringing increased accountability and transparency to a historically opaque market. Today, a mere 5 years later, more than a dozen states have these laws on the books. In 2018, California embarked on an aggressive mission to pass some of the most robust consumer protections in a landmark piece of legislation, the California Student Loan Borrower Bill of Rights. Today, those protections serve as the framework for the future of federal student loan servicing. And these protections matter. Because of you, deployed service members can spend time calling their families instead of calling their student loan company to argue about a misapplied payment. Because of you, nurses, teachers, and other essential workers can spend time serving their communities instead of navigating a maze of student loan rules. And because of you, policymakers are re-examining what it means to be a student loan borrower and the effect it can have across one's financial life. Your hard work doesn't only benefit the borrowers living right here in California. The actions you take today, the ideas you share, the policy you create will reverberate across this country and improve the lives of all 45 million people struggling with student debt. Your work, your advocacy is making real change. For example, this past summer, the Department of Education shared big news around closed school discharge. After reviewing ITT Technical Institute's closure, it was determined that 115,000 borrowers were entitled to have their loans canceled. As of late August, loan discharges approved by the department totaled nearly $10 billion, affecting more than 500,000 borrowers, a cause you all have been fighting for more than a decade. And after years of breakdowns that added insult to injury for borrowers in default, the department is ending its contracts with private collection agencies. Through this effort, the department can better prioritize people instead of profits by targeting more effective assistance to struggling borrowers. We already have the tools necessary to make a 0% default rate a reality, but because of you, we are finally taking the first step. And perhaps most notably, we've seen expanded protections for public service workers. Through the Department of Education's limited time PSLF waiver, we are correcting historical failures in the public service loan forgiveness program. Where we once saw 99% denial rates, we're now seeing nearly 1 million borrowers get closer to loan forgiveness. The promise of PSLF is real because you demanded it. All of these changes were made possible because you raised your hands. You told us the system was broken and we took steps to fix it. But the work isn't done. And to be perfectly honest, we've got a tough road ahead. The student debt crisis is real. People were struggling even before the pandemic, and they're still struggling now. Next year, we're embarking on the unprecedented task of returning tens of millions of borrowers to repayment. We are working hard to make sure the protections are in place to make this transition as easy as possible. For example, we're breaking down barriers to access affordable repayment plans. Historically, when a borrower's income changed because she lost her job or was furloughed, there were rounds and rounds of paperwork to document proof to get a new income-driven repayment amount. But now, for the first time, all federal student loan borrowers will be able to enroll in an income-driven repayment plan right over the phone. And research shows that when borrowers can get on track with these repayment plans, they are 28 times less likely to default. And while we have more protections like that in store to facilitate the return to repayment transition, none of us are under any illusion that this will go perfectly, which is where you come in. The department, federal student aid, and my office want to partner with you. We want to break down the silos. And most importantly, when things go wrong, we want to hear directly from you so we can fix it. The sooner the better, because as I explained earlier, when your voice is heard, real change happens. So if there are problems, we need to hear them. We need to grow our partnerships with the states and the advocacy community to better extend our outreach, our communications efforts, and hear real borrower stories. There cannot be change without awareness. Because this is your life, and these are your struggles. You cannot and should not let anyone else tell your story. But if we work together, we can amplify your message and ensure your story is told. So thank you again for having me today, and I look forward to your questions.
All right, thanks for those words of encouragement here, Bonnie. We certainly hope folks have been hearing us throughout the summit that absolutely we need to hear borrower voices at every step of this process. It's what creates the change here. So thanks for saying that again here. So this is the time where we hope to get to some audience questions as well. So feel free to drop those in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get some more information out to y'all. But Bonnie, let's start with, here in California, we're about to have our own student loan ombudsman through the passage of AB 376, the Borrower Bill of Rights, that many of us here worked very hard to get here. Can you explain your role at the Department of Education and what should borrowers know about their state ombudsman if they have one?
Well, first off, congratulations. I know that was a hard-fought victory, and you really are setting the tone for other states, and very excited to see all this happen. So at the federal level, the Student Loan Ombudsman serves as this unique position as being sort of this separate entity within government that you can go to when things go wrong. I have a mandate in the Higher Education Act to resolve borrower complaints. And so when things go wrong, which, it's not a question of if, it's just when, you have someone who knows how the system works that you can reach out to get help. So you can go to, people call their servicers and they don't always get the help they need right away. And so this provides you another level of service. Now, I am just one person. I have a great, fantastic team, but again, we are just one office. And so that's where state ombudsmen come in. And I work for the states that have student loan ombudsman. I work very collaboratively with them. So you should feel like if you raise your hand to talk to your state ombudsman, you're going to get the same level of service and get your complaints resolved. I work closely with them on individual borrower cases to spot trends, to do root cause analysis. So for every person that complains, there might be 10 more that didn't, and we can get that problem fixed for everyone. So think of your state ombudsman as somewhere to go to get legitimate, correct advice about your student loans. There's a lot of scams out there. This is a place to go to for correct information. And then when things go wrong, this person can help you get things sorted out.
Wonderful. Thanks, Bonnie. Yeah, we're very excited and looking forward to having our own ombudsman here in California. And then we've also been hearing, a lot in the news, maybe just like headlines that 99% of PSLF applications are denied, or they have been, so why should folks even bother applying?
Yeah, so I mentioned this a bit in my remarks. The denials, they're real, and it's not great. There was a promise of PSLF, and we really weren't holding up the government side weren't holding up our end of the bargain. But that being said, last month, the Department of Education took action to fix this. We introduced what's called the limited time PSLF waiver. And so if you have been denied, please try again. We did our very best to fix all of the mistakes we knew about and take action to make sure we can give people credit. And so if you're still, one, try for the waiver. And then two, if you're still running into problems, you should reach out to my office.
Great, thanks, Bonnie. We have a question from the audience here. Does volunteering full-time qualify as employment for PSLF? Where do retired teachers fit in for PSLF?
Volunteering does not count. You need to work at least 30 hours per week. And so think of the entity that signs your paycheck and does your W-2. But one thing I do want to flag is that there's a lot of people who had qualifying employment and did everything right. Maybe, from 2007 when the program was announced till 2017. And because of servicing breakdowns and bad information, they got knocked off track, and they've since retired, and now they're out of luck because part of the requirements of the program is that you have to be in public service at the time of forgiveness. Luckily, one of the great things we did with this limited time waiver is waive that requirement. So right now under the waiver, as long as you did 10 years in public service while you were making payments, while you were in repayment status, you don't currently have to be working in public service to get loan forgiveness. And so if you're retired, if you had those 10 years in service, I encourage you to pursue the waiver. And if you have extra questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. We can get you more information. I know we've got folks on standby and chat to help get you more information, because we want to make sure you get the relief you were promised under the program.
Yeah, always good to clarify about your qualifying employer, and it needs to be employment. And then do Parent Plus loans qualify for PSLF?
This is a tricky question, and so I'm going to go slowly and let me know if you need me to repeat anything. Under the traditional requirements of the PSLF program, Parent Plus loans do not count unless you consolidate them. So if you have a Parent Plus loan outright, that alone is not going to count. But if you consolidate it into what's called a direct consolidation loan, and you make payments on that loan, that new consolidation loan, under an income contingent repayment plan, then you can accrue credit towards PSLF. Now, the second part of it is the waiver. Currently, the waiver is not structured in a way where Parent Plus loans count. But if you have a mix of Parent Plus loans and loans for yourself, please reach out to my office, because there are situations where you consolidate, you might still have eligibility.
Yeah, a lot to keep track of.
I'm happy to repeat any of that. So the long and short of it is, by themselves, they don't count. If you consolidate, maybe.
Okay.
Yes, if you consolidate under the traditional rules, probably not under the waiver, unless you're one of the few that have both types of loans.
All right. Yeah, a lot of things to consider. And then let's see. I know that this question keeps coming up, through a lot of different workshops throughout the years here. But do folks still get credit for PSLF during the CARES Act repayment pause that happened starting March 2020?
Yeah, that's a great question. So normally forbearances and deferments don't count towards PSLF, but the way the CARES Act was written, the forbearance period does count. So it's a different type of administrative forbearance. It was specifically written into law that time would count towards PSLF.
Got it. And then if someone's been working, let me really quick circle back here. Maybe do Grad Plus loans also count for PSLF? Are they different?
Grad Plus loans do count. They do count. And I know a lot of people have a mix of Grad Plus and other types of loans. Again, with the waiver, you can consolidate without losing. Normally, prior to the waiver, if you consolidated, you would lose credit on the underlying loans. So right now that is waived, and so you'll maintain that credit if you consolidate. So if you have several different types of loans and you want to consolidate just for ease of having that one payment, just know that option is available to you now.
Awesome. And then we are going to be, hearing from college students later on today, and hopefully some of them have joined right now. For all of our college students, currently watching, what advice would you give them if they're thinking about PSLF? They're still in college, but what should they know when they're about to graduate if they're planning on this program?
Yeah, so PSLF is great and a really critical protection, because oftentimes we see with public service professions, you need a lot of education. Oftentimes you need a master's degree, but the pay is not usually commensurate with what the education required, right? So oftentimes we see social workers all need master's degrees, but they often have more debt than they earn in a year. And so public service loan forgiveness creates a light at the end of the tunnel. A standard repayment plan, you make payments for 10 years and your loans are paid off. PSLF, you make income-based payments for 10 years and then your loans are forgiven. So it really puts you at the same place you would have otherwise been. But the one thing I do want to flag is that life happens, people get laid off, people get furloughed, careers change. And so PSLF is great, and it is something that makes serving your community a possibility. But I just encourage everyone to still be cognizant of the debt balances they're pursuing. I think that's still important. And then know that if PSLF is not available to you because you exit public service profession, there are still options available to you. Income-driven repayment, things that tie your monthly payment to your loan balance, not your, to your income, not your loan balance, that exists regardless of your profession. And so, you're looking at payments as low as 10% of your discretionary income. And if you're not in a public service profession, after 20 or 25 years, that's forgiven as well. And that's totally separate from your employment, doesn't matter where you work. And so it's not the end of the world if you can't get PSLF. PSLF matters and it makes public service accessible. But if life happens and your path does change, just know there are still options for you.
Yes, and we do want to let folks always try to look into things early and plan ahead. All right, and then we have a question from Megan. Can my past payments count even if I consolidated after this new rule took place?
My past payments count. So I'm going to repeat it just to make sure I'm understanding. If you have been making payments on separate loans and you consolidate tomorrow, will those still count? Yes, it will count up until October 2022, which is when the waiver period is over.
Great. Hopefully we captured that correctly. And I know this question came up a little bit yesterday, so maybe just best advice. It's always kind of hit or miss with when you're contacting your servicer. But there was a question, I'm going to try to summarize here. When you are submitting your PSLF application and employment forms, to FedLoan, and maybe you're not hearing anything back from them, what's kind of the appropriate timeline to make sure you follow up and that you heard from someone that the application was accepted, that they have everything on their end. And if they're not hearing back, kind of what's the next step for borrowers to do to check to make sure it got submitted correctly?
So yeah, that's real. That problem is real. To be totally blunt, there's a big backlog right now. We're aware of it. FedLoan is aware of it. We're working through it. We're putting more resources towards it, but there is a backlog. And so borrowers who are pursuing this waiver all should have received an email from our Chief Operating Officer, Richard Cordray, saying, we're working on this, but it takes time. And so know that just know that there is a backlog. If you have concerns about whether your application was received, you should be able to call FedLoan, and the customer service rep should be able to confirm whether it was received. Now, whether it's processed and been reviewed and everything is different, but confirmation of receipt, they should be able to tell you right away. In terms of a processing timeline, unfortunately, I can't give you an estimate because when the announcement was made, obviously FedLoan got hit with a ton of applications. And so we're working to make sure that they have the staffing they need to just get through those. But if you're going on months and months and haven't heard back, you should not hesitate to reach out to my office or submit a complaint and say, you're waiting months and you haven't heard back. And we can certainly take a look and see what's going on. And if you want to submit a complaint to us, you can do that at studentaid.gov. There's a link at the top that says submit a complaint. You can submit a complaint to the CFPB. That's just cfpb.gov. All of those options will get a complaint over to FedLoan.
Great, and we'll be dropping that link in the chat here shortly. But we've also heard from some borrowers who tried to switch to an IDR plan during the pandemic reliefs, but were kind of told they're not taking those applications right now from their servicers because everyone is in forbearance. technically. So how do these borrowers get enrolled in an IDR?
There was a lot of conflicting and misinformation at the beginning of the pandemic about how they were going to process the CARES Act. You know, it was putting the entire federal portfolio into forbearance was not really something they had done before. And so, but the kinks are worked out, and I'm happy to report that now every borrower should have the ability to call up their servicer and get into an IDR plan. And in fact, as I talked about in my remarks, we've made it easier to get into an IDR plan because you can verbally attest to your income now. It used to be you had to fill out a bunch of paperwork, you had to import your income from the IRS or send in a paycheck as proof of income. We've temporarily removed those barriers. So all you have to do is call your servicer. And so I know that it's not always everyone's favorite answer to hear call your servicer, but the answer is call your servicer because they have instructions to accept this now. We have reports from all of them that this is now up and running. And so for whatever servicer you're with, if you were covered by the CARES Act payment pause, you should have access to this verbal IDR now.
All right, that's good to know. Yeah, keep trying to call. And then let's see, for folks that are probably just like, you know, they haven't really been submitting paperwork for PSLF. They maybe just heard on the news that all this is going on. Kind of what's your best advice for them on, you know, applying for this now if they think they qualify?
Yeah, so the best thing about PSLF is that it's not like you have to say, I want you. You don't have to raise your hand day one, and then that gets you your first credit. Like you could have been doing everything right and not have known it, and then still be getting credit. Particularly now that we've expanded eligibility through the waiver. And so the best thing to do now is to submit what's called it's oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the name, but it's this. We'll drop the link in the application or in the chat. It's the single form. It's a combination of the employer certification form as well as the application for public service loan forgiveness. It used to be separate forms. We put it all in one. And so even if you are, so if you're at 120, if you're at the 120 required payments to get loan forgiveness, that application, you fill it out, you check that box, and we'll get that processed for you. But even if you're not quite at 120, let's say you're only at 115 or 110, that application still is going to have your employment on file, and then they're going to send you a letter and say, this is how far you are. These are which payments count. If you have questions about which payments don't count, just reach out. We're happy to provide more clarity there. And that'll let you know how much progress you've made.
And then also, we've been hearing repayments are going to start again. We've been talking a lot about that. We'll drop into the chat as well some resources that you all have available, but what should borrowers be, you know, kind of keeping top of mind to be prepared for their payments to start again next year?
So the number one thing I want to stress to everyone is please, please, please make sure your address and contact information is up to date, both directly with your student loan servicer and on studentaid.gov. I mentioned that we're rolling out all these protections to make return to repayment easy for you. We can't do that, and we can't tell you what you're eligible for if we can't get in touch with you. And so if the best thing you can do is make sure your contact information is up to date. In addition to that, income-driven repayment, call your servicer. You can do that now so that you're ready to go once payments restart. Just tell them your income, and that means the first payment you make when payments turn back on will be based on your income. I strongly encourage this if you saw your income drop during the pandemic too, because you don't want to get a bill for an unaffordable payment amount. If you're unemployed or you have a very low income, your payment can actually be $0. And then auto debit. If that's accessible to you, auto debit gets you a little bit of an interest rate break on your loans, and then you don't even have to think about it each month.
Thanks so much, Bonnie. I know there's so much information that we're trying to get out here today, and we have run out of time. But for folks who are in the Q&A box, hopefully you can stick around. We will be doing a student debt workshop at the end of the day here today. And if you ever, have more questions, feel free to reach out to us at NextGen or any of our Summit partners, and we will try to help you out and connect you with the right resource. So thank you all for your questions. Thank you, Bonnie, for taking the time to be here with us and providing this great information, and for the work you do to help borrowers out. So we're going to get ready to get into now the advocacy workshop and how anyone can join in the fight against student debt, because we get it. We're all very busy with our daily lives, trying to figure out what's going on with student loans. But if you still want to join in the student debt movement and fight alongside other borrowers, hear right now from advocates on how to get involved, even if you just have a moment, but especially if you can join in meetings and events and more. So we'll get started now.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Chuck Bell. I'm Programs Director in the Advocacy Division for Consumer Reports. And it's a real honor to be here with you today. We have a panel of really seasoned and experienced advocates to talk to us about what they are doing to lift up the voices of student loan borrowers, especially those that have high levels of debt and are struggling the most, and the voices of those in disadvantaged and marginalized communities, especially borrowers of color and folks with low and moderate incomes. And we have on our panel today three great advocates. We have Ella Azoulay, who's a program associate at Generation Progress Higher Ed Not Debt campaign. And this is a campaign that links dozens of organizations at the state and national level, from labor, state and national nonprofits, community groups, civil rights groups, and veterans groups to help raise the voices of student loan borrowers. We also have Christy Johnston from Christy Johnston from NextGen America, our conference sponsor, which is one of the largest or the largest youth voter mobilization organization in the United States that's working to activate and lift up the voices of young voters. And she's National Press Secretary for NextGen America. And then finally, we have Ruth Sosa Martinez, who is the engagement coordinator for Young Invincibles. And Young Invincibles is a national organization working to represent and advocate with young adults from ages 18 to 34 on issues of economic security, healthcare, and higher education. So welcome, Ella, Christy, and Ruth, and thank you so much for being with us here today. So we wanted to start out by talking a bit about what you are doing to engage and activate your members and organizations in your coalition. This student debt crisis that we are struggling with did not take place overnight, as we heard from Bonnie and the last panel. The system is severely broken. We didn't get into this overnight, and we're not going to get out immediately, right? But we're inching to a new milestone of over $2 trillion nationwide, owed collectively by over 45 million borrowers, with the average debt load of $37,000 for the most recent crop of college graduates. And of course, some people have much, much more than that. So could you say a little bit, each of you, about what is the urgency that you are seeing in advocating for student borrowers? And what are some of the top calls to action or issues that your organizations are individually focusing on at this moment? And why don't I start with you, Ella?
Sure thing. And thanks so much for that great introduction, Chuck, and the great question. So as you said, student debt is not a new issue. And just to zoom out a little bit, it's been around for decades. However, I believe, many of my colleagues believe, that student debt should not be normalized the way that it is. It's not normal that I only have a handful of peers who don't have student debt. It's not normal that 1 in 3 young people are burdened by student debt. But unfortunately, this is something that is normalized. We've seen generations past of middle-class white folks who are able to afford a higher education without going into student debt. And so I think and I'll get into this a little bit later, but we've seen a huge systemic and decades-long disinvestment by the federal and state governments in higher education. And so we've gotten to this boiling point where we have 45 million student loan borrowers holding $1.7 trillion of student debt. And the urgency of the moment is that this is a crisis, and also that we're closer than ever to seeing student loan debt cancellation. Given our current administration, they've slowly been canceling student debt for select groups of borrowers at a time. We've seen with the total and permanent disability discharge. We've seen relief for defrauded student loan borrowers who attended for-profit institutions. So we see it's been happening bit by bit, and now we just can't afford to take our foot off the gas. This is the urgency of the moment. We're close. And given this current payment pause that we're in because of the pandemic, we even have proof that we've never had before. We now have proof of what it would be like for borrowers in the day-to-day when they don't have to worry about those monthly loan payments. We know that it's a big relief for them and that it frees them up to make other purchases, to put into their retirement, to pay the bills that they need to pay. So we have proof that this is a good thing. And so I think really that's the urgency of the moment, is that we have folks in our corner at the education department. We've seen a little bit of cancellation already. And so I think the top call to action right now is we cannot stop pushing for debt cancellation in advance of the payments that are set to resume in February. But regardless of whether or not we see that cancellation before February, some folks are going to go back into repayment at that time. And also we want to make sure that, as Bonnie talked about, that folks are taking the steps to protect themselves and their finances, and that folks aren't caught off guard. I'm a borrower myself, and I've found some really great, helpful resources that I'm happy to drop a link to. It's really goes well with what Bonnie was talking about. It's a 6 steps to take before the payment pause ends. And again, want to emphasize again what Bonnie talked about, which was that if you think you may be eligible for PSLF relief, do that before payments resume in February, because while we are fighting for debt cancellation, we don't want folks to be caught off guard when payments do resume. So top call to action, still fighting for debt cancellation, and I'll leave it at that.
Great, thank you. So try to square your own situation if you can, but keep on fighting and raising your voice for everybody else. Christy Johnston from Next Gen America, what are some of the priority issues and tactics that you guys have been emphasizing?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think Ella touched on it really accurately on the urgency of what's happening right now. It's really a moral issue when we're looking at who is being affected most by student debt is communities of color. 85% of Black college graduates have student loan debt, and 2/3 of women also have student loan debt. So we're really looking at the most vulnerable communities in our country really being affected the most by this. When we're looking at Next Gen and what we're doing, I think the most effective tactics that we have had is speaking directly to who can make decisions about this. So we highly encourage young people to tell their stories. These stories need to get to people in power. We need to be talking about real substantive things that are affecting your life, and how student debt is holding you back from accomplishing what you want to accomplish. Higher education should not be only for the white and the privileged. It should be for everybody. And the fact that, it's affecting communities of color, it's not spontaneous. It's not something, that it's completely by design. So, that's our big thing there, is telling the stories, writing letters, making sure that you are getting what you want to say to the president, to the Secretary of Education. We've hosted a few town halls as well with Chuck Schumer, Elizabeth Warren, really just focusing in on how can we partner with the people in power that actually want to do something about this, and getting those stories out there.
Terrific. And yeah, I could say that, storytelling has so much power to it. And I think especially, many policymakers are in my generation or older, And many of us had very small amounts of student debt relative to what you guys are shouldering these days. And so I do believe policymakers are really moved and affected by the storytelling from your organizations. Ruth, could you tell us what Young Invincibles is doing to engage your membership and constituency, and what types of priority issues have you been focusing on?
Yeah, so I think Ella and Christy both touched on it very, very well, that a lot of the impacted communities are people of color, are women, are low-income individuals, and non-traditional students. And one thing that YI has been doing is really talking to young adults about the issues that they're facing. Because at the end of the day, the loans that they're taking out are not just going towards tuition and books, they're going towards housing, they're going towards food, transportation. And so really addressing not only like basic needs issues that these young adults really are needing while they're studying and while they're getting their degree. But also we've been in the Student Debt Coalition, and our partners, as well as the policy focused staffers at YI, have been focused a lot on advancing protections for student borrowers. So we've been doing quite a few things. I also want to emphasize what Christy said. At YI, we also love to uplift the voices of young adults and really emphasize the struggles that they are facing, especially when we're talking to legislators. It is so much more impactful to have young adults in those meetings, talking to legislators, telling them the day-to-day struggles that they're facing and what can be done to help them, than it is for us to show up to a policy meeting or a legislative visit and tell folks, hey, a lot of the students we talk to are facing these issues. It just does not have the same impact. And so storytelling really is super powerful, and it's so helpful in pushing for policy changes and advancements for student borrowers.
Thank you so much. And I have some more specific questions for each of you, but before I go to that, I want to just touch on something that came up yesterday, which is that many of the panelists yesterday were kind of emphasizing that when payments resume, this is going to hurt a large segment of borrowers. People are going to be struggling with that. So for us, I guess that's both an opportunity for organizing, but a lot of economic pain for certain communities, right? So I'm just wondering if any of you would like to speak to that point. I guess it underscores why cancellation is really a moral imperative and so urgent, but just wondering what you think about that point. Anyone want to respond to that?
Sure, I can speak a little bit about it. I think this kind of goes back to the question of like why it's so urgent, right? And I think one thing is that we are creating the conditions for a generation that is going to lack economic security. And so by not making college more affordable, by not canceling student debt, by not providing basic necessities to students who are trying to advance themselves economically, we are letting them down. We're letting down not just the generations today, but the generations to come. And so that is why it's so urgent and it's so necessary for us to continue to advocate for this.
Thank you. Ella or Christy, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I totally agree with what Ruth said. And I think I'll add also just that I've, in working with students and borrowers, you see, you hear from folks that their stories, and again, to emphasize the importance of sharing your story, but like people will share their experiences of, the fear of falling into default and for being forced to choose, do I make my loan payment this month, or do I, can I afford, school materials for my kid, or can I afford to put food on the table, or my gas bill, or, or pay for my necessary life-saving medicine. And so like that's, by canceling student debt, you are taking that horrible choice away from people. Like we would give them the opportunity, that cancellation would give many people the opportunity to not be put in that situation. So I think that's just the one thing I wanted to share was like, we hear this from borrowers all the time, that they're forced to make those choices because of their student loans. So I think that's the urgency. I mean, we want to see fewer people in that situation. So.
Thank you. Christy, do you have a comment on it?
I mean, yeah, Ella, like you said, a lot of young people are going to have to decide what they're spending their money on, especially if they have kids. It's like this, also touches at this vicious cycle that student debt is bringing up for a lot of people for generations to come. This isn't something that, should I buy food today or should I buy rent or should I, pay my rent? There's that kind of personal aspect of it, but it's also, how do I provide for, my children? And then, it's just this kind of cyclical thing that's going to keep happening. So, it's going to hurt a lot of people. And yeah, it's, we're really at a breaking point right now.
Yeah, in a way, it's like the whole family takes on the burden of debt, right? Because maybe you took out the loan, but your parents co-signed for you. And Krista, you're pointing out even the kids, are affected by this. So the whole family is part of the equation. Okay, so I'm going to ask a question to Ruth, and that is that we know that young people, college students in particular these days, are starting out their careers with lots of competing demands on their time. And so what are some easy ways for young people to get involved in advocacy, Ruth? And could you tell us more about what you're doing in your youth advocacy program? And also, how are you coping with the limitations that we're all dealing with relating to the pandemic and difficulties in having in-person contact? How has the advocacy landscape shifted because of those barriers?
Yeah, so I guess I can answer the first and last question kind of together. So one way that you can get involved is attending events like this, right? Like learning more about the issues, learning how to get involved and connecting with organizations like NextGen, like Young Invincibles, like all of the other partner organizations that we have here today. And secondly, sign up for newsletters. Most of us send out monthly newsletters with resources, with ways to get involved, with different activities that we're going to be doing within the next month or next couple months. So there's definitely a lot that you can do. And I think that is another thing that has kind of changed with the pandemic, is that we've seen a lot of our advocacy efforts shift to virtual advocacy efforts. And so it's a lot easier to get involved virtually, especially if you don't have a lot of time on your hands. I think one thing that I've noticed as a young person, and I've heard a lot of my colleagues mention similar experiences, it's really hard to get involved. It's really hard to start getting involved in advocacy, but it's even harder to stay involved. And so just making sure that you're staying in contact with the organizations that you work with, whether that just is like making sure that you're getting their emails or following them on social media to see what's going on and what advocacy efforts you can get involved with. And another way that you can get involved with YI specifically is we have a lot of programs that we run with young adults. Our first is pretty low commitment. We have monthly calls for young adults in different regions. It is called our YI Leadership Network. And these young adults meet monthly to organize around issues that they care about in their communities, in their regions. And I can definitely drop some more information on that in the chat. We have one meeting actually later this afternoon. So if any of y'all are interested, definitely feel free to reach out to me. We also have, like Chuck mentioned, our Young Advocates program. This is a paid leadership development program that we run twice a year, one time in the spring and once in the fall. Like I said, it is paid. It's a super great opportunity. We teach young adults, especially folks who maybe don't have any experience in organizing or in advocacy. We train you on how to organize in your community, how to build coalitions, how to advocate for issues that you care about, how to talk to legislators. And you're in a group of about 20 other young adults across the state. So you get to meet other young, passionate adults who are also interested in the same issues that you're interested in. Lastly, we have our Young Adult Advisory Board here in California, which really helps steer our policy work. We take feedback from young adults all across the state on issues that are impacting them, issues that are impacting their peers. And you don't have to be a college student to join any of these programs. A lot of the folks who engage with us and who work with us are already young professionals working full-time jobs and just want to get more involved aside from the work that they do on a day-to-day basis.
Super, thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
I know one challenge people often face is that our inboxes are all flooded with emails from dozens and dozens of organizations, but when you have been a volunteer for a group like Young Invincibles, you can draw closer to that group and really identify with it, right? And so I think that causes a lot of people, it causes your emails to jump out a little more because people know who you are and what you stand for. And from the standpoint of the advocates, it's so important that we have people in all the districts of the individual elected officials, so that you're an asset for this movement, that you can go and talk to your senator or representative or whatever it is. So please do open every email you get from each of the three groups that are here today. Okay, next I would like to go to you, Ella, to talk a little bit about the the Build Back Better Act, which is on the threshold of being passed in Congress, or the infrastructure bill was passed, right? And initially it had included free community college. And so we know Generation Progress, you've been keeping close tabs on that bill. Can you tell me what happened with that provision, how we got to where we are today? What are some of the calls to action that you did and key takeaways? And what's the next step for people who want to keep fighting for free college?
Sure, absolutely. And just to give some context as to why something like free community college or free college is important when we're talking about the student debt crisis, is because it is the other side of the coin when we're talking about debt cancellation. In order to once and for all fully address the student debt crisis, we can't just have debt cancellation, because we would still have the root cause of the issue, which is that college is not affordable and it's not accessible. So if we're going to make sure that, once we wipe out the debt, students would just simply, if we didn't address the root cause, students would just continue to rack up more debt, and we would be in the same predicament that we were in before we wiped out the debt. So free college is about addressing the cause of the issue. And that's why I say free college and debt cancellations are two sides of the same coin, because these two solutions need to go hand in hand if we're talking about fully addressing student debt. What happened was that free community college was initially in President Biden's Build Back Better proposal. And free community college is an extremely popular idea nationwide. There's a ton of individuals support it, because we know how many people are impacted by student debt. And if something like free community college was an option, then so many people could have avoided debt. So it's a popular idea among individuals, students, borrowers, among grassroots advocates and activists. Unfortunately, through the negotiation process, free community college was cut from the bill, from the proposal, because Senator Manchin from West Virginia was not a fan, doesn't see the value in free community college, which is unfortunate, because particularly people in West Virginia would benefit from something like free community college, his own constituents. So it's really unfortunate to see, but we're still going to be obviously pushing for free community college and free college as a broader ask. And so I just want to, underscore that this idea of free community college, while folks were fighting for it to stay included in the Build Back Better Act, it had gained a ton of momentum. And free college as an idea already had a ton of momentum in Congress. We know that even before all this talks of reconciliation and the Build Back Better plan, even before that, there were several pieces of legislation that were introduced into Congress that would give us some form of debt-free college, sure, in varying amounts and through different methods, but there were a number of bills that would accomplish some kind of debt-free college. So we know there's an appetite for this. It's on the table. And so that's what we're going to be fighting for in the next legislative session. We're fighting for debt-free college. And quickly, I'll just circle back. What we did see in the Build Back Better Act, we do have an increase in the Pell Grant, which is really good news, especially for low-income borrowers. For folks who don't know, the Pell Grant is a federal grant that aims to help low-income borrowers afford costs associated with attending college. So not just tuition, but folks can use their Pell Grant money for, any other costs associated with being a student. So food, housing, books or materials for class, childcare, transportation. There are so many costs that really are often left out of the idea when we're talking about how expensive college is. There's so many other costs. So the Pell Grant is great because students can use those funds for whatever they need to make college happen for them. So we saw an investment in the Pell Grant, and we also saw in the infrastructure bill new historical levels of funding for HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, and MSIs, minority serving institutions, which was great. But this is not our end goal in terms of when we talk about, affordable college. This is not it. We're not satisfied here. We're pushing for more. And so I can drop in the chat a fact sheet that we at Generation Progress have that outlines kind of all of our asks, all of the components of what we would want to see when we're talking about an ideal piece of college affordability legislation. What would a perfect free college bill look like? So I can drop that in the chat. And like I said, when we're looking ahead, we are pushing for Congress to take on and to pass a debt-free college bill. So they've already got options. They've got America's College Promise Act. They've got the College for All Act. They've got the Debt-Free College Act. These are all sitting on their table. So what we can do, what folks can do, is call on their members of Congress to pass one of these bills. And in fact, Generation Progress recently hosted a week of action, a debt-free college for all week of action, to do just that, to put pressure on our members of Congress to say, hey, this is urgent. We are in a college affordability crisis. We need to make sure that future generations are not burdened with student debt the same way that we are. And so we took digital action. And again, I'll drop all the links for folks you can still take action. It's not too late. But we said, hey, email your senators and representatives, call them, let them know. You can click to take action here to let them know that this is something that we need. We need both debt-free college and we need President Biden to cancel student debt. In addition, there were several rallies held. There were marches. I saw folks, really taking action, especially during the time of the negotiation process during reconciliation, that people were really mobilizing. We even hosted a virtual rally to call for debt-free college and debt cancellation and funding for HBCUs. And we organized virtual lobby meetings to bring borrowers to their own representatives virtually to share their stories and to, again, call for debt-free college. And so a great, awesome time, week of action. That's the kind of thing, Generation Progress, that's the sort of what we do. So folks want to, get involved. Like I said, I'll drop the link. And then just to, again, underscore that there is a huge appetite for this, for free college, for debt-free college. There are options on the table. I'll drop a toolkit for folks who maybe, if you don't know exactly what does debt-free college entail, what does that mean? There are resources, there's information, and there's, again, opportunities for you to take action. So ask your members of Congress to prioritize debt-free college in the next legislative session and support one of the many bills that already exist that would give us debt-free college.
Thank you. I think I just want to underscore this point again, because if we canceled student debt on a broad-based basis and we didn't do anything about the high cost of higher ed, we would just be passing this on to the next generation, right? We would not be really solving the problem at all. So I agree with what you're arguing. It's critical to address both sides of the equation. So I want to ask you just a little bit about the partisan nature of this. Isn't this debt-free college a fairly popular idea, even with folks in swing states like Virginia or Arizona, West Virginia or Arizona? This is a pretty popular idea, even with conservative folks or people who live in rural areas, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yep. Across the board, people who have either come face to face with like student loans as a reality for themselves or their family or their community. Like you said before, student debt it's not an individual problem. It really impacts the entire family, the entire community. And so odds are, if you're not someone with student debt, you know someone with student debt and you see how it impacts them. And if you see that, you're going to understand the value of something like free community college or debt-free college, because today, if you have any hopes of earning enough money to like support yourself, your family, save for retirement, buy a house, anything, if you want to better your living situation, people understand that in order for, a better paying job, most of them are going to require a college degree of some kind. And so if that degree is not accessible without going into debt, people know that's a problem. So absolutely, I think free college is a popular idea across the board. I think you're muted, Chuck.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I was going to say that folks from all sides of the political spectrum say that they want families to be economically self-sufficient and be able to stand up and pay their bills and function in the modern economy. But especially conservatives should care about this, because ed debt-free college would help promote family self-sufficiency and economic independence. So thank you for what you're doing, and thank you for keeping the struggle going. Obviously, we're going to all have a lot more to do to keep pushing that forward. So Christy, we've been hearing throughout the entire conference about movement to cancel student debt, and Next Gen America has been in the forefront of that struggle. Can you talk some more about what you guys have been doing specifically, and what are effective advocacy actions we can be taking now, and how can we mobilize more people to join this campaign?
Yeah, definitely. So, a big part of Next Gen's work is listening to young voters and what their top issues are. And that's exactly what we did in the last election cycle, when we turned out the largest, most diverse generation in American history. And one of their top issues, time and time again, when we were talking to them, was student debt. That was always a top 5 issue. So, really, when we were speaking to them, they were voting for President Biden and Vice President Harris to cancel student debt, a lot of them. And, a lot of promises were made along the way, along the campaign trail, that we want to see fulfilled now. To sustain this base that we've built, especially in the last year, that we're gonna have to start fulfilling on our promises, and it needs to start now. And also, when we're looking forward to the midterms, Next Gen actually did some really interesting polling in North Carolina and Pennsylvania, where canceling student debt was, I think, in North Carolina, the second most important issue, in Pennsylvania, the third most important issue. So, and that was from across the board for both, Democrats and Republicans. It's, as we were saying before, something that across the board, we can see is a really important issue. And I think also 54% of voters overall believe canceling student debt is something that we should do. So, that's kind of how we have been, our origin and how we've gotten involved in the fight. The last few months, we've been hosting and co-hosting workshops and debt cancellation, like informational events. As I mentioned before, we had one with Senator Schumer and other prominent representatives to, not only engage our supporters, but really show them how they can get involved and really get their stories out there. I think right now what we have up next is, as I was mentioning before, continuing to tell the stories, continuing to put the pressure on. We're making calls, we're texting, we're making sure that we're communicating with our legislators on what we want done. So I think I can drop this in the chat as well, but I can, drop some resources on how we can continue putting pressure on Congress to make sure that we can get this done.
Terrific. Thank you so much. So are there some individual stories that any of you may have about individual borrowers advocating that have really touched your heart? Or is there a few moments from the campaign trail that you'd like to share with our audience here? Anyone?
I can share one, sure. And this story comes from a borrower who was a part of those virtual lobbying meetings that we hosted during our week of action, where we connected, borrowers to their senators and advocating for debt-free college. And this story was particularly heartbreaking because it hit close to home for me. I know plenty of people either with the same exact story or, it was very similar to my own, but, you see this often with first generation borrowers who either, their parents didn't attend college. And so they're, navigating this process of applying to college at 17, trying to figure out how you're going to afford this massive bill, 30, 40, upwards of that number, 30 to 40,000 per year. And you're 17. And the easy answer that when you meet with either a counselor or someone from the financial aid department of your college or whoever you meet with, you're so often, just told to take out student loans. That's the easiest solution. That's the quickest solution. And so many 17, 18-year-olds they don't know what they're getting into. Their parents are just proud of them for, getting into college, going to college, doing something that has never happened in their family before. And they take on this huge burden at 17 and don't know how to navigate the process. Either get, loans that are going to be impossible to pay off due to interest or due to, you're lacking the family financial support that most people have when they are paying for college. Or I shouldn't say most people, but people who avoid student loans, they usually have family financial support. And so, just to see the impact on this borrower who was sharing her story, she now has to think about her and her father are going to be in student debt likely for the rest of their lives. And that's already impacting how the financial decisions that she navigates, if she's able to get married, if she's able to buy a house ever, or if she's going to see her dad work for the rest of his life because he can't afford to retire because he also took on loans to help her go to college. So it's just, you hear the very real consequences for people, and you're reminded that it's a very personal issue, that this impacts not only the day-to-day, but it could impact the rest of someone's life. So that story stuck with me.
Ruth or Christy, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I think I've heard so many stories that are just so similar. So there's not exactly one story that there's a lot of stories that stand out to me, I guess. So it's really hard to just talk about one. But I think some of the issues that I've heard most about is, and Ellie kind of touched on it a little bit as well, is just people not having financial freedom for themselves. Having to move back in with their parents, having to decide whether or not it's a good time to have kids, having to decide whether or not they can even afford a mortgage payment or even rent. And then getting false information from a lot of different people on how easy it's going to be to repay their student loans, or even what options they have for repayment. So I think there's just so many flaws in the system that we need to address, and really it's such a common experience that it's so heartbreaking, and it's heartbreaking that we're still hearing about it right now.
And I also totally should have mentioned, but Ruth just reminded me of this, that some of the even, the stories that are like harder to hear are, for example, like students who have attended for-profit institutions, because they're really sold a bag of lies in terms of like exactly what you said, Ruth, about how easy it's going to be to pay off those loans. They're sold a bag of lies when it comes to the quality of their education. Most of the time, it's going to be a low quality program, and those students who attend a for-profit institution are going to either have a really hard time finding a job afterwards or transferring because they'll find the credits are useless, or just the value of that degree is not what it was advertised to be. And so now you have a bunch of people with student debt, either without a degree or with a degree that's not going to get them a lot of places, or they don't have the skills that they need to find a job in that field. So especially those stories, I'll say, from for-profit institutions are really tough to hear.
Right. I mean, those are especially heartbreaking where, someone feels like I'm taking this major step to improve my life. I've been urged on to attend college by my parents and my teachers, and then they go to a school that doesn't provide a quality program. They may drop out and be held back by relatively small amounts of student debt, even like $5,000 or $10,000 will add up and could go into delinquency. And now you're not able to make anything more than when you started out, right? So this is definitely an issue that our movement cares deeply about, is we want more accountability for these for-profit colleges. And if they're going to keep their doors open and be using federal student aid, they have to provide a quality education. And we got to get rid of this this dichotomy that we've been seeing. But thank you. I think, and also you advocates do point out the challenge that we need to keep people motivated and focused on trying to resolve the personal issues that they have, but also the societal issues that we're trying to tackle with debt cancellation and free college. So I'm sure that's a challenge that all of you face in your individual work. Is we have to cultivate a sense of hope that we can win this together as a movement, as so many other social movements in the United States have prevailed after many years of struggle. Christy, did you have any comment you want to make about this issue, or we could move on?
Yeah, I would just say really quickly, Ella and Ruth touched on this, but like having multiple friends and family members who have like $800 plus a month to owe on student debt. It's like, that is absolutely like absurd. And it's something that no other generation has had to deal with before. So I think just staying passionate about like the real like numbers behind this and really just like thinking about that. And, especially, when we're talking about like the economy, when we're talking about, so many different factors in this, it's so unprecedented. And it's so, it's really just like unfair for the opportunities that we need to see. So just keeping the passion, keeping the fire lit is something that is really important for this fight moving forward.
Thank you. So and also just one number that always comes back to me is that of Government Accounting Office has reported that of borrowers who have gone into default on their federal student loans, 70% of them could have qualified for income-driven repayment if they had been given the right information by their servicer. And that's really what hooked me into this movement, is the poor customer service provided by our student loan servicers, and the fact that so many people could have dodged like one of the worst outcomes you can have, to have your loan go into default and debt collection and the damaged credit and all the rest of that. So behind all of these numbers that we have is an immense stories of pain and individual economic suffering. Okay, so let's see if we can take a look at some of the questions that are coming in. Well, one question people have is a little mechanical here, but how are servicers getting paid or getting paid back? They have contracts with the federal government to service these federal student loans, but is it true that some are going to be leaving the marketplace, like Navient or FedLoan? Do you guys have any comments about what borrowers should be thinking about that issue?
I think this is maybe a little bit more of a policy one question than I'm qualified to answer, but I will say just the idea of, like I said before, in decades past, it was on the federal government to ensure that people had access to higher education, because a degree, like as we know, a degree is necessary if you hope to achieve financial stability, right? So in the past, that cost for higher education was on the federal and state governments. Now the cost has shifted onto individuals, and that's why we see people are unable to afford it. I think if we want to invest and have a society where not only are people able to survive and make their bills, but also have a society where people have are skilled and are able to contribute and create things and, meet all the needs that we have. I don't think it's out of the question to, again, have that cost for higher education fall on the government the way that it did in decades past. So I think there, each of the, as far as I know, there are different approaches to debt cancellation, but I don't think any of them would simply leave servicers hanging. I think it's about shifting the costs. And like I said, I think it's reasonable for the costs to be shifted back onto the government as they once were. So.
Thank you. And I think also the Department of Education will work to get new contracts, so when a servicer exits the market, they've got to find another company that takes on that contract. And the problem for the borrower is just making sure that they connect well with the new servicer, that they get the information when that transfer has happened and that the right information goes over to the new servicer. So there are a lot of challenges with respect to all of that, but Bonnie Luttrell and her colleagues at the Department of Education will be working very hard to try to make those transitions as seamless as possible as payments resume. But we do think it is something borrowers really have to watch out for. And you should be getting, invoices from your servicer when payments resume, and you have 21 days to pay, and so forth. But if you don't get something and you have federal loans, you're definitely going to have to reach out to the Department of Ed and your servicer. So one other question that's come in is from someone who's saying that they are concerned that when both young folks and maybe older folks who have gone to college are saddled with really high levels of debt, their salary really just may not be high enough to provide for paying off the debt. So income-driven repayment is one solution that, or a measure that many people can look to help reduce the burden of payments. But if you don't work for a nonprofit, PSLF is not an option. So I guess this really goes to you, Ella, I guess this underscores why fighting for free and low cost higher ed is so important. If we want to avoid that, there's really no other answer that we have, is there?
Yeah, sorry, could you just say the beginning of the question again?
Yeah, it's from a borrower who returned to college at age 56, and she finished her BA, and now she's taking income-driven repayments because her salary is not sufficient to cover the full cost of her repayments, and she's worried for her daughter, who's 33 but now accumulating student debt of her own, that she may be looking at a similar situation.
Yeah, so that's definitely, I think, a common case that we hear, unfortunately. And yeah, absolutely right. This is a great example of why we should be fighting for a debt-free college, at least as an option. I think, this ties back, I think, to what we were talking about before, which is that we've seen costs skyrocket to this, and it's a convergence of factors where we see because of the decades-long disinvestment in higher education, at the same time, because of that, we see tuitions skyrocket, and inflation continues to increase. So the cost of living continues to increase, but wages have stagnated. So it's all of these factors that come together to make higher education really inaccessible and unaffordable. So if, for example, wages had increased right along with inflation, right along with the cost of living, maybe the situation would not be as dire as it is now. But because of all of those factors, because of tuition has skyrocketed, the cost of living has continued to increase. Now we're in this place where even the income-driven repayment plan is inaccessible to some, or at least puts you in a situation of financial strain. So really, we just have to keep fighting for a debt-free college option.
Can I ask you, Ella, is there like a marquee type of, or what are some of the bills that I should be going in to talk to my senators and representatives about now that Build Back Better Act is over with or dealt with? Is there a bill that you guys are really pushing on this issue going forward?
So Generation Progress, we don't endorse any one piece of legislation, but in our fact sheet, there we do, which I dropped a link in the chat, we do highlight a number of components, like I said, that would be included in any good piece of debt-free college legislation. So we don't know if there's going to be more free college bills introduced in the future. So that's why we say, at least if you're going to endorse one, it should have these components. So encourage folks to take a look at that fact sheet. But these components would apply to both Senator Sanders' College for All Act and to Senator Schatz's Debt-Free College Act. In addition, I think there's also introduced in Congress the America's College Promise Act, which again, each of these bills would go about implementing different different amounts of debt-free college and would do it in different ways. There's good things about all of them. So yeah, I encourage folks to take a look and take a look at that fact sheet. And if you're going to lobby your member of Congress, make sure that whatever bill that they support or endorse has those components.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. So we were talking earlier about some of the borrowers who are the most negatively impacted by high levels of debt are borrowers of color. And so how can our movement be more inclusive of marginalized communities and people whose voices are not necessarily being heard on these issues? Ruth or Christy, would you like to address that?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, listening to those borrowers, listening to the struggles that they're facing, and to the issues that are impacting them, whether that be housing insecurity, food insecurity, or just in general, not enough, they're not making enough money to pay their everyday bills, and meeting them where they're at. You know, we know that a lot of people of color face multiple economic challenges. And so time might not be the most accessible to them, spending a lot of time like actually reading about resources that are available to them, or even just engaging in advocacy efforts. So meeting them where they're at. If you have to set a meeting after work hours to be able to engage with folks like that, then making sure we are being as accessible as possible so that we can listen to their voices.
Thank you. Christy, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think it all starts with listening. I think the real power in this movement, or where it's going to come from, is going to be the communities that are most affected. So it's going to come from Black and Brown communities. It's not going to magically happen from somebody who doesn't have student debt, who's not involved in the fight, who is not immediately impacted by this. It's certainly not going to come spontaneously from government, especially, just given the demographics there, until we have better representation in government, people who are dealing with these struggles, especially with student debt, who know, the day-to-day of what this looks like. Not a lot of movement is going to happen. So exactly as Ruth said, it starts with listening. It starts with amplifying those voices, starts with getting those voices to people who can do something about it. And then it's, not only mobilization, but representation. It's about getting people with these struggles in office and making the change. And again, it's going to start with communities of color who are leading the voice on this.
Thank you. And Ella, you guys work with civil rights groups and labor unions. So obviously you have within your network a fair amount of diverse organizations that represent different types of borrowers.
Yeah, and I was just going to add really quick, if I could, that, Black and Brown borrowers are disproportionately impacted by student debt. We see Black borrowers are, due to systemic racism, due to racist lending policies, due to redlining, a number, the racial wage gap, a number of factors, Black borrowers are more likely to need to borrow more, and to take longer to pay off their debts. So any amount of student debt cancellation would be a step in the right direction when it comes to addressing the racial wealth gap, when it comes to addressing the disproportionate harm that student debt has on Black and Brown borrowers. So canceling any amount of student debt would be a huge, huge step in the right direction. I think that's, that's the thing to keep on, top of mind when we're talking about debt cancellation. Absolutely what Christy and Ruth said, we need to center the experiences of, in particular, Black and Brown borrowers. And yeah.
So let me ask you a question about how we frame our messages for advocacy on debt cancellation, because we're constantly coming up against this narrative that, many borrowers were able to pay off their loan successfully and go to college. And the answer is for everybody to just buckle down and pay off their loan. So cancellation is often framed as something that benefits some people and not others. How do your organizations address messaging in your advocacy? Maybe Christy, would you want to start?
Yeah, definitely. You asked about messaging on student debt. Yeah, I mean, when we're looking at it, it affects not only young people, it affects everybody, any recent graduate, any millennial, any middle-aged person, and when people are in debt, they can't afford housing, they can't afford food, they can't afford healthcare, or retirement. So it's really not only affecting people's individual lives, it's a drain on the economy, and it's a roadblock to this entire cohort of people who are, just wanting to have a higher education and pursue higher opportunities for themselves. So I think overall, when we're looking at it, it's a drain on society, it's a drain on the American dream, and overall, just something that we're going to have to keep fighting for if we want to eliminate it and provide more opportunities for all of us.
Thank you. Ruth or Ella, do you have a comment on this?
Oh, yeah, I'll jump in really quick. What you mentioned before, Chuck, is one of my biggest pet peeves for the people who say, well, I worked hard. I got, you'll often hear people who went to college 50 years ago say, I worked hard, I had a summer job, and I paid for my education. Or even people now who say, I worked hard, it took 20, 30, 40 years, but I paid off my student loans. And so everyone else should too. That is really frustrating to hear because, first of all, like I said, due to the other factors, the factors that have gotten us to where we are today, you can't just pay off your college tuition with a summer job. That's impossible. Knowing what the minimum wage is, knowing what a college degree costs, it's just simply not a reality. Maybe 50 years ago, sure, because a semester at school cost $200. That's different. That's not what it costs today. So that argument, I think, is really frustrating to hear. And also for the people who say, well, I worked hard and paid off my loans after 40, 45 years, 50 years, whatever it is. Why do you want that for future generations? Why do you, just because you suffered, you should not want to see future generations suffer the same financial strain, the same stress that you experienced. The whole point of, I think, society is we should want to make things better for future generations. The same way that we're fighting to improve our climate so that future generations don't suffer extreme weather events, we should also be fighting to improve our economy so that future generations don't suffer debt the way we experience debt. I think it's as simple as that, is that we should want to make things better, not worse. So that's that's the argument there, is just making it better for future generations.
Thank you. Thank you. And Ruth, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, definitely agree with both Ella and Christy. And also, I know I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I feel like just elevating and centering the voices of people who are actually experiencing these things is super, super important. There's no other way to find messaging for this type of issue other than by actually hearing the people who are experiencing student debt. And yeah, maybe that's just the organizer in me that's always coming back to the voices of the young people who are facing these issues. But
right. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. So this generation is uniquely burdened by much higher levels of debt. There's a public health crisis. There's a growing body of research that says that that debt cancellation is progressive, that most people in the society do not have large amounts of wealth to fall back on to satisfy the debt. So this is a policy that's good for everybody. So thank you so much for joining us today for our advocacy workshop at the Free My Future Summit. Please stay tuned for the next panel. I'm going to turn it back to Sam Seng, and our next panel is the Future Costs of Higher Education panel, starting shortly at 12:30 Pacific time. So Sam, back to you, and thank you so much to my panelists, Ruth, Ella, and Christy. You did a fantastic job. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
All right, and thank you so much, Chuck, for moderating our panel discussion there. It was great to hear about all the work that's happening on the ground. And again, yes, definitely thank you to all our panelists for sharing their thoughts and insights as they're dealing with the policymakers and working with borrowers on the day-to-day. So starting right now, we have the Future Costs of Higher Education panel led by our student leaders. All right, do we have Brendan on the line?
Yes, hey Sam.
All right, take it away, Brendan.
All right. I just want to go ahead and welcome everyone to the Future Costs of Higher Education panel. My name is Brendan Rooks. I'll be your moderator for this panel. I am a current undergraduate student at the University of California, Riverside, and the Government Affairs Coordinator at the nonprofit advocacy group Student Debt Crisis, which has over 2 million supporters and advocates for student debt cancellation. I'm being joined today by Alex Niles, who is the Government Relations Chair at the University of California Student Association, Jasmine Prasad, the Vice President of Legislative Affairs for the Student Senate for California Community College, and Anthony Ruiz, the Vice President of Finance at the Cal State Student Association. I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to each of you to real quickly just introduce yourselves and the organization that you work for. So Alex, if you want to go ahead and start us off.
Yeah, thanks, Brendan. Hello, everyone. My name is Alex. I use he, they pronouns, and I'm serving as UCSA's Government Relations Chair this year. UCSA represents undergraduate students at all 9 undergraduate UC campuses.
Great. Jasmine, if you want to take it away.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jasmine, Vice President of Legislative Affairs for the Student Senate for California Community Colleges. We represent roughly around 2 million students across 116 campuses, so just advocating on issues that pertain to them.
Great. And finally, Anthony.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much. My name is Anthony, and I'm the Vice President of Finance for the Cal State Student Association, or CSSA for short. We represent the California State University system, so all 23 campuses and nearly 500,000 students.
Great. So I just kind of want to have a pretty organic discussion, and it's interesting because each of you represent a different group of students that represent, pretty much almost all students in California. And so, I kind of want to just get started off with, what you think are the biggest challenges that students are facing today, and how has the pandemic played a role in changing the landscapes for students and adding new challenges? This is open to anyone, by the way.
I guess I'll kind of go first. So on the community college level, one thing that has definitely been a struggle for students in the past 2 years due to the pandemic is definitely mental health resources and, of course, financial aid. We are very sad to hear 1456 did get vetoed, but we're still pushing for the second half. And a lot of students are struggling just to afford community college itself. Unfortunately, it's one of the most expensive sectors. So oftentimes we think it's the cheaper alternative because we get the 2 free years, but students are still struggling with the basic needs necessities. And I'm sure we'll get into more student loans into that later, but I will pass it off to any of the other student leaders who'd like to speak.
Real quickly, Jasmine, I just want to ask, can you elaborate on what AB 1456 is?
Yeah, so AB 1456 dealt with Cal Grant reform, so increasing the eligibility requirements so more people could qualify. Even now, students are qualifying for Cal Grant, but just aren't receiving it because there isn't a lot of money allocated towards them. I know on the community college level in my own region, which is the greater Sacramento area, last year, a lot of students did receive the zero expected family contribution and qualified for other financial aids, but didn't qualify for Cal Grant, which is very concerning because it's supposed to help students. And if that money isn't being geared towards them to help them with the basic need necessities, obviously there's something wrong in the system. And we, have to ensure that obviously free college isn't expected at the moment, but definitely aim towards debt-free college.
Great, thank you.
One thing I would just add about the pandemic is, so last year I chaired a group at UCSB called Lobby Corps. And that's part of our Associated Students Government, and along with a couple of other agencies or a couple other entities in the student government, we used some of our surplus budgets because we weren't traveling during the pandemic to fund a grant program for COVID relief for students, and we got thousands of applications. I think it was close to 3,000 of a campus that is like 25,000 undergrads ish. So it was a huge number, and just the stories we got were, it was people could not pay for medical expenses. There was people who'd lost jobs, people who had housing contracts that they were stuck in but had to move home during the pandemic, and so had huge housing costs. So many students had lost family members or had been, really sick themselves. The toll on financial and mental health was just like heartbreaking to see. And you can imagine how this would derail academics, why students would need to take reduced classes or time off during the pandemic, might have to extend their stay at university. And yeah, I can't emphasize how much of an impact the pandemic has had on students' ability to work, to pay for basic needs, let alone just the cost of attendance.
Yeah, adding on to Alex and Jasmine, I completely agree with them. I would also say that technology is now being considered basic needs. There is a digital divide within our students, also a learning curve with both faculty and students, like navigating the new online learning environments. So that was a really big issue. It still really is a big issue. In our opinion, at the Cal State Student Association, we are really advocating for initiatives and programs. Not too sure if you are all familiar with the C-Success program. Can't really remember the acronym right now, but essentially the chancellor's office over at the California State University, they're addressing the digital divide by giving out iPads and with the keyboards to new students at select campuses. Right now, they're expanding that program. A lot of it is one-time funding, so they're trying to definitely expand that for future years. I would say that's a really big concern of us right now.
That gap in access to internet and technology was a similar concern for us. And a lot of the applications are for our grant program where people saying, hey, I need money to buy a laptop so I can do my classes because I don't have access to the library anymore. Another thing, UCSA last year prioritized rural broadband budget ask to make sure that students at home have enough access to internet. And yeah, so I fully agree with that. I also want to talk about like housing was another huge consequence of the pandemic. At the start of this year, coming back from COVID, for a confluence of reasons, the UC at multiple campuses had hundreds of students who just were not able to find housing. UCSB has, an incredibly, terribly high rate of students who don't have settled housing right now. We have over 100 students, I believe, living in hotels that the university's rented out for the fall, although they don't know where those students are going to go after fall, and they're not planning to continue providing those hotel rooms. some of these rooms are far from campus and pose issues like the students are like unable to purchase a meal plan and also don't have kitchens. So there's some students are having very much a struggle getting food. There's a horribly high rate of students who are homeless now or living in their cars and never, and all of these things like it makes it incredibly hard to like actually focus on your academics and do what you need to do as a university student when your living situation is just not safe and stable.
Those are all like phenomenal points. And Alex, you're absolutely right. I think, we see like the increasing like number of like houseless individuals and just seeing how that, impacts stuff. I know like myself personally, I had like multiple on-campus jobs that, I lost during the pandemic, and I kind of had to figure out where to get like my income streams from. So there's just so much like uncertainty for all students, and it's really hard to achieve academic success in that environment. So those are all great answers. And then kind of focusing more on, student loans, I know I myself am a student loan borrower. I'm sure some of you here are also student loan borrowers. I'm sure most of the people listening to the panel are student loan borrowers. Why do students take out student loans? We've had this long narrative that taking out loans was a good investment and good debt, but what's the actual lived experiences of students today?
I can go first. So I attend Folsom Lake Community College as well as San Francisco State. And for SF, I live in the dorms. I have housing, but unfortunately it is very expensive. It is almost the same amount of rent that my parents have to pay for their own house. And believe it or not, a lot of people told me, oh, that's really cheap for San Francisco. And I, came from a small town, so it's very expensive for me. I did take out loans, and it doesn't even cover the full cost of the housing portion. I have to pay, I think, $10,000 total for the entire semester. I am very grateful that I qualified for Pell Grant, and that did cover my tuition, but many students don't have that opportunity and can't even get financial aid. So they're continuously taking out loans, and they eventually do have to pay it back. But students are struggling trying to get these jobs, balance the life of a student leader, just being a student on top of classes, driving, going back and forth to work and to school, and just continuing, which one's more important. Oftentimes on the community college level, a lot of students did say, even before the pandemic, that working was more important to them because they couldn't afford to go to college, or they didn't want to take out debts because later on they're going to have to pay more and there would be an increase in it. So it's very important that people realize, although student loans might seem like the great choice, many of us try to avoid it as much as possible because it is not helpful in the long run for us.
That's a great point, Jasmine. I kind of was thinking about what Ella said in the last panel about how, previous generations don't really understand that, you can't work your way through college and not take out loans anymore. From my own personal experience, I commute to save costs. I've worked like pretty much full-time schedule my entire undergraduate, and I still have had to take out loans. So, it's how do we combat that? In California, we're lucky because we do have like pretty good, financial aid accessibility, but that doesn't work for everyone. It doesn't cover everything. So Alex and Anthony, do you have anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I think at this point, it's pretty widely recognized that the old connection between a bachelor's degree and employment doesn't really exist, in that just because you have a degree like doesn't mean you're going to land a job that will pay, cover your loans expenses and secure you a reasonable quality of living, or a livable income even. And I think students a few years older than us, like millennials and even early Gen Zers, have really shown students in university now that that's the case, and this is much more widely understood. And I've known a lot of people who have, either decided to avoid college altogether because they don't think it'll lead to directly to employment, or they don't think it's worth the cost. I've known a lot of people who are, going to community colleges or choosing Cal State over like UC or private colleges to save money. All these things, I think students are, much more likely to consider that now.
Yeah, at least for me and kind of like my friends during my undergrad, the vast majority, just exactly what Jasmine said, was to cover housing. That's what, especially like in the residence halls, that's kind of where I took out the vast majority of my loans. And I'm really thankful I necessarily haven't had to take out as much loans since. And I'm in my last year of grad school now. So I've been in college for 5.5 years now. But it is difficult just kind of having that like looming over your head. I mean, I've had that stress on me for the last 5 years, and thankfully it hasn't gotten any interest, but students are needing to work a lot more right now. I know a lot of student leaders, myself included, are working 2 to 3 jobs. I currently have 3 jobs, which is not ideal as a graduate student, but it's not because I want to, it's because I literally have to. And it does get in the way of academics, to be honest. I can genuinely personally say I'm not getting the most out of my MBA right now, just because I am missing a lot of school. I'm not doing the best right now. Did a lot better last year as opposed to this year. And I'm trying to change that. And hopefully for my last semester, next semester, I hope I can at least reduce it down to 2 jobs so I can at least enjoy it. But that's like the sad reality of kind of like the financial aid issues right now, is students are needing to take out these loans.
That's a great point, Anthony. I agree. I'm the same way. Like, I've had to work multiple jobs, and it's hard because you feel like you're not getting enough out of your college education, and you're having to take out loans, and then you have to pay off the loans, but then you have to work more because you took out loans, and it's difficult. And also on the housing point, I think it's really interesting. I'm sure this is a similar sentiment for most of you. Like, for me at University of California, Riverside, our housing fees for first-year students is greater than tuition. And, I'm sure that's like a very common sentiment among most California students, considering our high cost of living. So we already kind of touched on it a little bit, but I also wanted to talk a little bit about, the mental health toll of student loans on students, any like personal, anecdotes you can share, or stories that, you guys have leveraged. A lot of times throughout this entire summit, we've talked about how important it is for us as students to share our stories and to, lobby to, our federal officials to make sure that they know the impact that student loans are having on us.
Well, I can, start by saying UCSA has been, along with the Cal State Student Association and the SSCCC, together, California Public Schools have kind of been leading a national coalition of student associations pushing to double the Pell Grant. And I'll say what we talk about to legislators when we're talking about Pell Grant expansion. Students that are, have higher levels of debt, it constrains what career options and life decisions you're able to make post-grad. Maybe there's something you're passionate about, maybe you want to become a teacher or something, but you can't that's not financially tenable for you, and you have to do something else. Or you might have to, I don't know anyone who's even remotely thinking they're close to buying a home or anything, which, everyone's renting for as far as any of us can see. Starting a family, shit, I don't know. I don't know when I'm going to be able to start a family or anything, just because of needing to get financial security first. So a lot of these kinds of conversations, it really constrains your future and weighs tremendously on what options you're able to take post-grad.
Go ahead, Jasmine.
Sorry, I was just gonna say, going off of that, I definitely think it is a huge amount of stress just because as previously stated, a lot of students think in order to get a job, or at least a decent paying job, they have to go to college, but also people are starting to realize that's not entirely the case. And with that comes okay, once I do graduate, I'm paying all this money to go to a higher institution to get my degree. And then it's the stress of some of those people aren't even getting into the job that they have degrees for. And so it's I spent all this money, I have all this debt now, I don't know what I'm going to do. I mean, I can't get a job, and it's just so much stress that's on top of them. And a lot of students don't have access to, or at least on the community college side, to a lot of mental health services. So that's also hard for them. But I definitely think just trying to find a job and going into the workforce straight out of college just puts on so much stress for students. I know I'm still a student and I'm stressed. Okay, am I going to be able to get a job? Should I get one right now? That's a decent job that most people would require a degree for, just because it is that stress of how am I going to pay this off in the future. Like obviously you have the increase in for it. I forgot what the actual term is in like financial stuff. I'm a poli-sci major, not a finance major, but it does stress a lot of students out. And unfortunately, I've seen within the first week, some people quit housing, or again, like just people giving up on school because they can't afford it at all.
Great. Anthony, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I would also say that just I'm thankful that I don't have like a lot of debt, but I have friends that who are, like have like 20,000 plus, even more than that, and they're just like I can tell that they're obviously like nobody wants to take out debt, but they do seem down when like the topic does come up. They just rely so heavily on that just because there's no other option for them to like stay here, just because a lot of them are like first gen or their parents aren't able to support them as much. And I'm in Chico, so a lot of our students do come from like Southern California, the Bay, far away, and they really don't have that support system up here, so they just default to the loans, and that does take a toll on you over time. I mean, it has for me for the last 5 years. But like I said earlier, I'm thankful that the interest hasn't built up yet, and there is that worry about getting a job, especially right now with this job market. And I think it was Jasmine that mentioned people, or Alex, one of you two mentioned that people are getting jobs that aren't necessarily even in their field. That's part of the reason why I ended up switching kind of my field of study. My undergrad was in sociology and social sciences, and I'm really passionate about those two disciplines, that area. But I ended up pursuing a business degree just for like kind of financial security as well. And that was part of it, was because of my student loans. And I know it's probably not like the best mindset to have, but back then I thought if I wanted to pursue my master's in sociology or psychology, I just from a lot of like negative sentiments from other people just kind of like deterred me away from that. And I went to something that was a little bit, I guess more welcome to the job market. So there's that aspect to that did affect me just because of my loans.
Absolutely. I actually really resonate with that statement. I'm a public policy student, and we've heard previously about how a lot of people within public service, don't really get paid amazingly well. And, also within just the public service loan forgiveness program, how there's such a high denial rate. That's definitely one thing that I worry about, because I know for a lot of like the jobs that I would want to get, I would need to go and get my master's. And for like public service related master's programs, you don't really get that much funding. And so, just kind of the state of play and, considering how much debt I already have, it makes me really consider if even going and get my master's is worth it, and kind of makes me question, a lot of things about my future. And I'm sure, most people in our situation and most students in general feel like a pretty tremendous amount of financial anxiety. I know I do. So, so this is kind of like, we've talked about how, what the like sentiments and how we feel as students. And, we've kind of touched on already, the different ways that like your organizations have tried to create change. But what can the colleges and universities do to better support students so they don't have to take out the loans in the first place? And what can they do better to support students that already have loans?
I mean, to start on the first question, I guess I would say, short of a specific recommendation, just keeping in mind that a big driver of costs, I think at all three segments, is basic needs or the general cost of attendance beyond just tuition. Even at the UC where tuition is highest of the three segments, like I think it's something like 40% of our lowest income students don't pay any tuition. And yet we still have most of those students, I would say, are graduating with over $10,000 in debt, and that's because of the cost of attendance. So just keeping in mind that it's the cost of paying for food, for paying for transportation. We don't live in a state where public transportation is necessarily extremely accessible. Housing has just gone through the roof, of course. It's incredibly high. UC Santa Barbara, it's I think university-owned housing is something like 1,000 or more a quarter. When I was a freshman, not counting in food. Yeah, you're paying probably, or not a quarter. Sorry, a month. You're paying at least $10,000 a year for your housing, medical expenses, mental health expenses. These are essential components of getting the most out of our college education, making these degrees worth it. But they're incredibly expensive as well, especially when on-campus services are, struggle, like our CAPS at the UC struggles to provide long-term care for students. There's something like a 3-week wait time to get an appointment if you're not considered a priority. So a lot, keeping in mind the full range of cost of attendance and basic needs in driving up student loans, I think, UC has made some progress. They deserve credit for that. Like student regents led a conversation within the board of regents on changing the definition of basic needs. And that has allowed for a much more holistic recognition of what basic needs entails. But, making sure that we do that consistently when the state gives funding and within colleges and universities.
Absolutely. I just kind of want to add on to that point too, specifically with the regents, looking at also just tuition increases and making sure that, we as students are fighting against tuition increases, especially as the cohort tuition model has come into effect. Do Anthony or Jasmine, do you have anything else you want to add?
Yeah, basic needs, cannot stress that enough, is something that so many students are struggling with. And huge, shout out to the legislature for allocating 30 million ongoing for basic needs centers and coordinators on community college campuses. And with that, we've been really diving down deeper with the governor's work group on what the true definition of basic needs is. And, I brought up the point that when they presented to the board, we have to start looking at why some of these programs aren't benefiting students and how to fix those solutions. I know when I've been doing a bunch of pledge visits for our priorities, one office stated, we've already been giving a lot of programs to undocumented students, for example. How come it's not helping them? But after being in a webinar with a student speaking, they told me, they're still being charged out-of-state tuition, even though they live in state. So obviously there's some concerns of these programs aren't working for students, and the college and administrations need to figure out why and how we can, truly make sure that the model of the program is actually helping students to prevent them from, lacking these resources or going on to student debt and not obtaining these financial aid resources. Because at the end of the day, once they struggle with all of those, they can't afford college as a whole. Tuition is not the full cost of college, which I think a lot of people, have the idea that it is, but there's so many other aspects that play into that. And, I didn't really realize how many other fees we pay until there's a rundown for my CSU. It shows us everything. And I was like, wow, tuition that shows right here, it's not the full cost. There's so many other basic necessities that we have to pay for. And even that's not even fully covered within our original cost of college. So I think just definitely looking into the programs, why they aren't working for students, instead of saying oh, we've already given so much. Obviously they're not working. It's up to the administration to fix that problem. And also for, just students to keep advocating, I think to the legislative level is always helpful, of sharing their personal story, because once a member does hear that, they're more sympathetic and realize, okay, there's a problem here. We need to fix this for our constituents.
Oh, sorry, Anthony. No, go.
No, it's okay. You go first.
I just want to quickly add, Jasmine was talking, you're talking about resources or services for, specific groups of students. When universities provide resource centers or other services targeted towards specific, students with specific identities, whether, that's students who are former foster youths or undocumented students, or students who are coming in, having been system impacted by the carceral system, providing specific services geared towards these students can certainly help students navigate financial aid or grants or any other resources that might be available to them, but that might have, specific challenges to accessing given their unique situation. So that's not, resource centers and services are not going to prevent students from having to take out loans, but it can definitely, ensure that students aren't falling through the cracks and missing out on resources that would be available for them, but might be particularly difficult for them to access.
Adding on to that, Alex, that's really great that you mentioned that because that's what to mention too. So at Chico State, we have this new program. It's called Adelante, and it's essentially it's like a pipeline program. It's very similar to like EOP and TRIO if you have that on your campuses, which I think they do statewide. And Adelante is really unique to Chico State. It's essentially for sophomores through seniors. And it's we do like workshop like presentations, we do like outreach to them. It is like a mentorship program, so we have graduate advisors, and essentially it is targeted for first generation and or Latinx students. And it is funded entirely through a grant through the Department of Education. That it's a 5-year grant, and we got it because Chico State's a Hispanic serving institution, and we're only in the second year of the program. And unfortunately, this program wasn't around when I was an undergrad. It started right when I started grad school. So this is my second year working for the program. But we do like a lot of great work with outreach and presentation. They even offer summer research opportunities for our undergraduate students, and it's like a pretty decent stipend for them, as well as a faculty member. And the grant was essentially written by the Dean of Graduate Studies as well as the Dean of Undergraduate Studies. So, these high level positions were the ones that like sought after this. Like students didn't necessarily know that we needed this program, but it was like these two like university officials, admin, that really fought for that. And I would say that's what university officials need to do is advocate for programs like these. They help out a lot of students. I think we serve about 200 students a year. And in this second cohort, we're about to hit 400 students. And then it's supposed to be a class, kind of like an elective. It hasn't started right now just because of COVID, but they're gonna like make it into an actual in-person class where students do get elective units that meet their graduation requirements. So I would really like advocate for programs like these to be implemented statewide.
That's great.
And
go ahead. Sorry.
I just wanted to add about like when it comes to accessing programs like that or whatever service or guidance through applying for financial aid and grants, whatever it might be, touching back on the question of how the pandemic has changed things, I really think that so many students, as the pandemic, shut down campuses and switched remote, I think that there's a high chance that many students, missed certain information, had a hard time finding the support they needed, finding the information that might have been readily available from like counselors on campus. I think, it's important for universities to really wonder, like, who do we miss over the pandemic, or who didn't come into us because, they had sick family members, they had to work more, or they had other struggles that kept them from doing that, or who didn't just know where to reach out to, or whatever it may be, like really trying to make sure that students who might have fallen through the cracks there are reached now that we're back.
Yeah, I agree, Alex. That's really important. I think too, it's especially important since, COVID disproportionately impacted like low income and communities of color, making sure that like people that are impacted the most by like these financial decisions are the ones that are getting information. Kind of on that point too, I wanted to talk to y'all about, exactly how we even get information to students about paying for college. And when the best time for getting this information to students is. Like, should it be done, during college? Should there be more like financial literacy and college preparation classes done in high school? What exactly like is it that should be done? Because like I know also for myself, like there's scholarship opportunities that like I qualified for, but I didn't find out about until, like recently, so what can we do to make sure that students are aware of what's out there, and what can universities and the education system do to promote greater financial literacy?
I mean, for one, again, being proactive, I just know from my experience, one, it can be hard to know what questions to even ask or what all you need to do or where to even start. Also, other things can get in the way, like, just life or other concerns, or, deadlines for assignments can kind of get in the way and make it too easy to put those off. So proactive outreach, and then really like, doing as much as possible, really sit with students and guide them through the process. Like, FAFSA is like, what is that? It's a lot for a high school student. I also think it's never too early to start. I know that as difficult as it is for a student in high school to make a long-term financial decision, like, we're still able to think about these things well, and the more information, the better able we are to do it.
Yeah, I definitely think allowing students to know like as early as possible in high school, probably even as soon as junior year, because that's when a lot of people start thinking about what college they attend, to get familiar with the resources. I know around senior year, they start telling us about FAFSA, making sure we fill out the application. But I think another important issue that we need to touch on in the K through 12 system is definitely scholarships. I think a lot of students have that stigma. I know I certainly did when I was in high school, that scholarships are only for those who play sports. So I devoted my life to sports, even though I ended up not loving it as much as I did when I was younger. And that's not the case. There's so many other scholarships for students out there, where it pertains to their passions, if they're art or if they want to go into some other major. And I think, with that, there's also scholarships that nobody applies for because they just don't know about it. So I think familiarizing students of, okay, what passions pertain to you, and let's find what scholarships you can apply for, so you do have some financial security when going into college.
I mean, I didn't even know that scholarships, I didn't even know to think about applying to scholarships until like partway through my freshman year of college. So totally agree.
So I was really fortunate enough in my high school. I was a part of it's called the Criminal Justice Magnet Academy. It's in Sacramento, and it's through a few of the high schools, and it's in partnership with the Sacramento Police Department. And they did a lot of outreach to us regarding kind of like a career exploration, but as well college and scholarships, and like they would like force us essentially to do it. Like it'd be like an assignment to apply for certain scholarships. The thing is, I know like a lot of people don't have that, I guess, that opportunity to. I definitely wouldn't have been as successful myself if I wasn't in this program. I wasn't really a proactive student at first in high school and early on in college. Like I really needed like that extra support, and I was a part of it was a first generation support program at Chico State. It's called Reach, and like without those types of programs, I definitely wouldn't be in grad school now. I wouldn't have had all these opportunities that I have been able to take advantage of in the last couple of years. I know there. I guess like the university can do only so much. Like a lot of it does rely like on ourselves as a student, but also like it's important to recognize that students do have like outside things going on, like family issues, jobs. Like not everybody can devote as much time to applying for scholarships or looking at other avenues. A lot of students are just literally don't know. Like they're first gen, they're doing this for the first time. They don't like their family can't necessarily like support them. Just that's kind of what happened with me. Like my family wanted to support me as much as possible, but they didn't like literally didn't know what college is. Like my dad was only went up to the sixth grade, and before he came over to Mexico, he didn't go to school. And my stepmom, she went to school in Mexico too, didn't go to college, so just didn't really understand how to navigate, I guess, university life in America. So I think universities should. I don't know if all schools do this. I really don't know how other schools function, just because I did my undergrad, did my grad at Chico. But we have the Wildcat Scholarship. So it's one application process. It opens up in early January. It closes in February, and it's for all students, whether you're a current undergrad, graduate student, or even if you're a high school senior, apply to Chico State and you plan to attend Chico State in the fall. You can still take advantage of the scholarship application process. Basically, it's one application. There's 5 prompts. It's about like a 1-page response per question, and that single application applies to about 700 scholarships that we have at Chico, just like one general scholarship. Because realistically, like what student has time to apply to that many scholarship at once when they're working and they have family obligations, school, So I would like to see more support programs that definitely advocate just for financial aid. Applied for colleges and such at early ages, but also while you're in university, for the university to do as much outreach as possible.
That's great. Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think the whole point about first generation students and just like institutional knowledge, like, so many students that go to colleges in California are first generation students or come from low income backgrounds. And it's really hard to, get support once you're in college. And, I think that's a really great point. So we've kind of talked about like what universities can do to, increase more awareness about like student loans and financial literacy for students. But what can the state of California itself do to prevent students from taking out loans in the first place? And how can we reform financial aid or invest in students to prevent the needs to take out student loans?
They can start by expanding Cal Grant eligibility as outlined in AB 1456, that's removing requirements for age, GPA, time out of college, things like that.
Great. Anthony, Jasmine, anything else you have to add?
I completely agree with Alex. I think that's been like a huge priority for all of us. I really do like kind of, I guess, like the collaborations between like the different student organizations and bodies that are registered, that are recognized like at the state and federal level. I'm relatively newer to kind of like CSSA. This is my first year serving as an executive officer, but last year I was involved as a governing member. I said like on the Finance and Legislative Affairs Committee, and there's a lot of great work that our student leaders have done. I think the state, like from the CSU side, like the chancellor's office, like they need to like recognize that when they do recognize that students are going through difficult times. I think they need to have like a more student leaders, students at large, kind of like front and center, giving like their perspective, their opinion on how they're, I guess, like the issue that they're dealing with financially. I think that really helps out because these are the people that make the decisions, and they do value student input and voices. And from a lot of the times that we've had meetings with, like let's say like at the chancellor's office, they say that like they're really thankful that like they get to see like at least some students. They never have the opportunity to talk to students directly, which is an issue because like these are the people that like are making the decisions regarding our academics, the finances behind it, the cost, and they don't even have the opportunity because just their job prohibits them. They have way too many other obligations. So I basically added on. I think what we do is really great with like the Fixed Financial Aid Coalition. I love seeing the efforts between the different student bodies. I love seeing student advocates. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Great. I just want to clarify for the audience. You guys have formed this strong coalition in California, the Fixed Financial Aid Coalition. Can you tell us like a little bit more about what exactly that is and the work that you guys have done?
Oh, sorry, Anthony.
Oh no, I'll definitely pass it on to you all. Yeah.
So FFA is a collaboration between the student associations of the community colleges, Cal State, and the UC. We started a few years ago, and we've been working closely with the California Student Aid Commission as well as other coalition partners since. And really the biggest thing that's come out of that is just very close student input and coordination that went into forming the ideas of AB 1456, that landmark Cal Grant reform bill. And so it's just been this incredible body for getting the student perspective closely factored into decisions, state level decisions on financial aid and Cal Grant. And I think it really shows like, what great results come out of when students are closely consulted on, our needs and our perspectives firsthand. And it's just been tremendously effective.
Great. Jasmine, did you want to add to that or talk more about what California can do to prevent students from having to take out student loans?
Sure. So, as Alex stated and Anthony, I'm so grateful for the FFA, Fixed Financial Aid Coalition, because, with all the student leaders together, it really does show how much students across the state are struggling, no matter what sector or background they come from. But I do know regarding student loans, there was a bill in, I believe, the 2019 to 2020 legislative session that had like borrower and loan restrictions just to notify, when payments are due. So just although like some bills might seem really small, they are such progressive bills because obviously something can't be implemented right away. There has to be baby steps and see like, okay, is this working for students? Is this helping them pay off their student loan debt? Just getting notified in advance, like when their payment is due, so they can coordinate, what time they get paid from their work schedule. Because oftentimes, we do have bills and we can't always pay those bills if we have to wait till we get paid. I know that's a huge struggle for many students. So just having small implementations like that, seeing if it is working and continuing to build off of that and making sure that there isn't, I forgot the word, Anthony stated it earlier because I'm not a finance major, but when they increase it, I cannot think of it at the moment, but yeah, I'm trying to think, but I can't. But when they start increasing it after like a certain amount of time, just so they can still get allocated money back to them, oftentimes it seems like those loan companies are benefiting off the students and not, it almost seems like, oh, we're here to help you pay off debt, but in reality, like interest, that's what it is. They're gaining a lot of interest out of it, so it's like, we're here to help, but in reality you're just giving us a lot more money than we gave you, which is very concerning. So it's definitely issues like that that should be looked at on the legislative level, and really hearing students' perspective of how they're struggling and what are some ideas that they think the state could help them achieve those gaps and prevent that from happening to them.
That's a great point. Sorry, go ahead, Alex.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry. There's also a bill in the legislature, SB 20, that would automatically notify community college students about eligibility for CalFresh. I think facilitate their application process for that by like, yeah. But anyway, so doing things like that at the other segments as well to automatically notify and facilitate the application process for students. Like if students are already providing information in one place that would help complete their application for something like CalFresh somewhere else, then combining those applications to the extent possible and taking, keeping students from having to repeat the same thing over and over again. Things like that can really help. Also removing overly onerous like work requirements on receiving food benefit. It's pretty, some of the CalFresh work requirements for students are pretty excessive right now. Also making sure that undocumented students are fully able to access CalFresh benefits as well. Because currently, I think undocumented students, for those that don't know, are not able to receive CalFresh because it's barred at the federal level. So there's a bill, SB 464, that would fund CalFresh benefits for undocumented people in California at the state level.
Great. Those are all great answers. And then I also kind of wanted to just bring up, like Jasmine, you had brought it up, that, right now the student loan payment pause, we're all current students, so we hopefully aren't in repayment. But, there's like millions of students nationwide that, will be starting to begin their payments on February 1st after the student loan payment pause was put into effect last March, and so I guess I'm just kind of curious to, what work, because I know for us as current students, a lot of times we like to focus on like college affordability because that's where we're at currently. But like, what can we be doing more? And, what kind of work has the organizations that you guys are part of been doing to, kind of look at like the student debt crisis issue as it currently exists as well?
I think what we can be doing more is definitely looking into ways to prolong that, or just look at, some eligibility requirements that, look at case by case studies. For example, I know on the federal level regarding CalFresh, SNAPs, Pell Grant recipients now automatically qualify for CalFresh if they live in the state of California. But when you fill out the application, it only asks you if you're Cal Grant A or B. But it's like, wait, I qualify for Pell Grant, so why am I not being able to complete that portion of the application? So I know they're still trying to expand that to where they can still receive it even after, executive orders and the pandemic slowly transitions out, because a lot of students are still struggling. Obviously, if they're still getting a grant, may not be the in-state Cal Grant, they're still struggling from a low-income family. So seeing if, we can also look to that when it comes to student loan debts, like, students are paying this. They can't afford to pay off their debt at this moment. They're still struggling to find jobs, struggling to get on campus jobs. They can only work a certain amount of hours per week if they work on campus. And then on top of that, as I think Anthony said, he has 2 to 3 jobs. That's an excessive amount on top of being a student leader. And then on top of classwork, it's very stressful. So just seeing, what requirements or like how to look at a case by case studies of, okay, can we wait a little bit longer or wait until they have a stable job to start paying off that debt without having too much of an interest for them, because obviously it takes time for students and honestly anybody to get back on their feet. And I know with community college students, our average age is around 21 to 25. So obviously they took some time before getting back into college because they thought, I can afford college, now I can. And even though I'm still struggling, I don't have the money, I barely have the money to afford community college. How am I going to now pay off my debt? So I think that's definitely a concern that needs to be looked at.
Great. Alex or Anthony, do you have anything else you want to add?
I think that was great, Jasper. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, it was a very comprehensive answer. Thank you. And then I also just kind of wanted to ask y'all, about like the individual organizations that you work with. What are your priorities within, funding higher education like right now? And what work have you done like yourself or with your organization that you're particularly proud of, where you feel has like made an impact for students and for borrowers?
I mean, I think all 3 of these segments are just do incredible work every year in uplifting the student voice to our administrations and to the legislature. But I'll give one example that I'm especially proud of on the UCSA end. Well, this is actually something we all did jointly, but we recently got $550 Pell Grant expansion included in the Build Back Better budget reconciliation bill. It's a lot of B's. That's built on the backs of a work of a whole national coalition of people that have been pushing for Pell Grant expansion. But it was the student voice getting in the room with key legislators that I think did really push that over the edge and make sure that we got that amount secured. $550 is not even remotely close to enough Pell Grant expansion to actually restore the Pell Grant to providing that level of affordability that it used to. It's just not enough for students, but it's a strong first step. And it's something that we'll continue to build on in the future as we get more Pell Grant expansion and restore the Pell to what it used to be able to do for students.
That's a great point. Yeah, I know that like with y'all in the Fund the UC campaign, like Pell Grant expansion is like one of the biggest things. I'm kind of interested, you brought up the Build Back Better plan and everything. And, I know Ella was on here previously talking about free college and talking about, the free community college proposal that was in the Build Back Better plan. And it looks like, obviously that's not in the plan anymore. So, I'm kind of interested to see, what y'all have to say as well about, free college proposals and, what we can be doing as students to make sure that we're advocating for those as thoroughly as we can.
So for the free college proposal, very sad to hear the 2 free years were cut out, because although California does have that already implemented within the community college side, it would still be beneficial to us because that money could have been allocated towards increasing Cal Grant, making sure more students can obtain financial aid, or even towards housing implementation, because community colleges do not have housing structures. And that is one of the most important issues that students still talk about to this day. So just implementing it towards basic need aspects for our community college campuses. But we are still advocating as much as we can on the community college level through SSCCC. We have heard a lot of student concerns and, very grateful for a lot of the feedback that some members have been giving to us. I know recently there was a listening tour, and many students are struggling with mental health, and, we're looking to fund more mental health services just so it can help students, because a lot of students don't have insurance and it's really hard for them to obtain, somebody to talk to, a counselor, or even get anxiety, depression, ADHD medication that can help them through their educational career. So it's very important that we allocate more of the funds. We did get 30 million ongoing. So very happy that, the legislature did see a lot of the student struggles during the pandemic and can thank them enough for so many progressive bills that helped, whether it be pertaining to CalFresh, making students learn about it during orientation across all three sectors, or even, basic needs and mental health allocation, even OER textbooks. They just allocated so much funding and we are so extensively grateful for that. But there's still a lot more work that has to be done. That all the funding does solve those problems, but it's the finer details. So I'm in our own organization right now. We're looking to have licensed psychiatrists on every community college campuses. I do know the CSU system does have that, and I cannot thank them enough for implementing that on so many campuses because it is so helpful to the students. They look at their financial aid aspect and their income so they can make sure it is affordable to them. So seeing how we can also do that for our community college students.
I would like to, before we head out, I wanted to add on, over at the CSSA, we just recently passed our 2021-2022 policy agenda. It's located on our website, so it's accessible to everyone. But I did really want to highlight our first priority. The whole policy agenda has 4 priorities and 17 goals under, but I wanted to highlight the first priority that we have, and it's to ensure students have access to baseline services and resources in order for them to enable educational accessibility. And I'll just quickly read through some of the goals. With goal number 1 being access to reliable technology, broadband. Number 2 is addressing student housing insecurity and homelessness. Number 3 is addressing student food insecurity. And there's a few other ones, but I just wanted to really highlight those two because that is what we really have been focused on as an organization for the last couple of years, and we're going to continue to do so. Even now, it's addressing like the digital divide. But I love to see all the great work that all 3 organizations are doing, representing all students in the state of California, which I think is huge.
Great, that's amazing. Too, and I just want to ask like one final question before we do our closing remarks. It's amazing that like y'all have been able to kind of set up this like big California coalition, of students, and we're seeing right now that like students have like a very like important voice in determining like policy and like what policy is being enacted, and just making sure that we're fully like mobilizing students. And I'm just kind of curious to like what y'all have like thought, or if y'all have any thoughts about trying to organize and mobilize students on a more like national basis, because like obviously y'all have done it within California, and what work can be done to better organize and create larger impact through more national organization.
I mean, there used to be a national U.S. student association that went defunct a few years back. And then since then, I think one of the biggest things that is since then, UCSA has played a role in forming this national coalition of student associations and admins that have been working to double the Pell Grant. Even we're still building this coalition. We've been taking meetings with we had one with Northern Illinois University, was our most recent meeting of just, getting more folks on board with this work. And, I think the lesson is there's different capacities in different places, but students everywhere are ready and able to do this work. And a lot can come out of this like kind of level of coordination. And so the Pell Grant Coalition building has been really, educational and inspiring story, and we're having conversations about maybe other issue areas where increased national level coordination would be beneficial. One of those being related to undocumented student issues, is to be specific.
Great. Anthony or Jasmine, do you have anything you want to add to that real quick?
I think that'd be great. I'm not too sure kind of where there have been like previous efforts, at least with the CSSA's part, just because I'm relatively new to the organization. That's something that I'm going to ask. I think that'd be great. But I do know that our president, CSSA president, he's been reached out by various universities, and he has met with them. And it's like a lot. I think it was that some students within HBCUs that were they're trying to form like their own, I guess, like student organization. So I think that would be really great also, but I'm not too familiar with the whole processes behind all that.
Great. All right. I just want to, we're closing in on time here. So I just want to thank my panelists, Alex Niles, Anthony Ruiz, and Jasmine Prasad. Thank you all for attending today, the Free My Future Student Debt Summit. Please stay tuned for the next event, the Student Debt Workshop, where you'll get all the updates on what's currently going on with student loans and get your questions answered about your loans. Led by Student Debt Crisis Center and Savvy, you'll get a walkthrough of applying for public service loan forgiveness, including a rundown of recently announced reforms to the program. That's the Student Debt Workshop starting shortly here at 1:30 p.m. Pacific time. Thank you very much. And I'd like to again just thank my panelists, Alex, Jasmine, and Anthony. Thank you. And I'll hand it over to you, Sam.
All right. Thank you so much, Brendan, for leading us through that discussion. And thank you to all our student leaders for sure for taking the time out of their school and work schedules to be with us here today. It's always great, again, to hear directly from borrowers and students about what's happening, in your everyday life. We do want to keep emphasizing the point that those stories are what makes the difference as we fight for policy changes here. So thank you all again. So we are at our last event for the day and for the summit, the Student Debt Workshop. We have our wonderful partners, as you heard Brendan mention, the Student Debt Crisis Center and Savvy here today to share their expertise and the latest on student loans. And if Cody, we have you on the line, I will hand it off to you.
Hey everyone, this is Cody. I am the Executive Director of the Student Debt Crisis Center. I'm going to give our Borrower Outreach Coordinator, Sabrina, just a minute here to get our slide deck up. But in the meantime, before we get started with the workshop, I want to thank the students who are on the last panel. I always like to discuss this, but when we first started working on this issue years ago, it was so challenging to find young people who are ready and willing and interested in the topic, mostly because they're in school, they've got other issues that are priority. Student debt, their student loan payments haven't really begun. Seeing the work that folks like NextGen and other allies have done to really bring this issue in front of young people and mobilize young people, it's really been, I think, one of the most important and interesting developments in the movement to address student debt. So really exciting to see that. All right, so let's get started. We're going to do one of our student loan help clinics. This is one of the most rewarding work that we do. It's really exciting to be able to help individuals tackle their student loan burden. Historically, we've said that letting folks address their student debt frees them so they can take action and better fight for reforms. So Sabrina, let's move on to the next slide and we'll do some quick housekeeping before we get started. So today we're going to talk about student loan basics. It really starts with some fundamentals. Many borrowers we speak to don't know about the types of student loans they have. They're really confused. It's a complex system. So we'll start with some fundamentals. We'll work our way up to some important policy updates, changes that have happened just in the last few months. We're going to cover affordable repayment plans. These are critical for people that are struggling to afford their payments or for people who have been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. And then we will also talk about student loan forgiveness programs. They are real, and we want folks to know how they can apply and qualify. At the end, we will talk about an online tool we have to help people understand their options and to enroll in federal repayment programs. And I just always add an important caveat. We are not financial counselors or attorneys. We are here to help though. We're advocates. We are people who have student loan debt ourselves. So we have a great fundamental understanding of the issue at hand, but there are situations in which a borrower will want to contact an expert attorney or a financial counselor for other types of issues. So I just want to introduce the folks on today's call. As I mentioned, my name is Cody Hunanian. I'm the Executive Director at the Student Debt Crisis Center. We are a nonprofit that centers the voices of student loan borrowers to impact public policy and end the crisis once and for all. And we have about 2 million supporters across the country. So we are really a people-powered movement and a people-powered organization. We should have on today's call, I've got Sabrina Calazans. Sabrina, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Sabrina Calazans. I'm the outreach coordinator at Student Debt Crisis Center. I'm a student loan borrower, and I know that this workshop has been very helpful, not only to me, but from other people who have watched it. So thank you for joining us today.
And we also have Lindsay Clark from our partners at Savvy. Lindsay, are you on the line?
Yes. Hey, Cody. It's great to be with you all. My name is Lindsay Clark. I'm Director of External Affairs here at Savvy. We are a social impact tech startup based in Washington, D.C. That help people navigate the very complicated repayment and forgiveness system. And I'm also joined by my colleague, Ian Kuhn, who's going to talk to you about the free platform that we provide for all of you today on the webinar to be able to hopefully reduce this burden and reach student loan freedom. So thanks for having us, Cody and Sam and everyone at NextGen and Student Debt Crisis Center, and excited to be here.
Thank you, Lindsay. I've worked with Lindsay and Ian on dozens of these workshops, these clinics for student loan borrowers, and I don't know two other people who are willing to put in the work and really help folks understand their situation. So we're always really excited, and it's a privilege to have them here today. As I mentioned, our organization centers the needs and voices of borrowers, and we partner with allies. I just want to also note, Student Debt Crisis Center believes that this is a crisis and that we have to act now to address the immediate needs of borrowers. That's exactly why we're here today. We know that you all are facing a personal crisis when it comes to student loan debt, and we feel that step one is helping you all understand your options. For 45 million Americans, student debt means a delay of countless dreams. It stops people from buying houses, starting families, building businesses. This should be the first step for many of us towards financial freedom, and we're really excited to be a part of that. With that, I will pass it to Sabrina, who's going to go over a quick overview of the student loan situation facing Americans and Californians today.
Thanks, Cody. So today, we're looking here at the screen, we're looking at the national spotlight, and we see that the average student debt per person is about $37,172, and about 45 million Americans are burdened with student loan debt. And the total is about $1.7 trillion nationwide for student loan debt. We don't say this to try and scare you, but it's so that you know that you're not alone in this. It's a systemic issue. The system is broken, and it's not your personal mistake. This is something that's impacting millions of people and their families. And so we really like to bring that to people's attention, because we hear from borrowers that they have guilt or shame surrounding their student loan debt, and you shouldn't have that. So today's agenda, we'll be talking about understanding your loans, important updates, repaying your loans, federal forgiveness, and more. I think I might have skipped, hold on one second. Sorry about that. So whenever we talk about the crisis, we have to talk about the communities that are disproportionately impacted. And in this case, it's women, communities of color, and low-income communities. So we see here that women hold about 2/3 of the total student debt in the country. We see that older borrowers are the fastest growing group, and that Black women have the most debt per borrower, and that over 70% of recent grads have debt. And when we talk about the domino effect, we hear so many times how borrowers tell us that they cannot save for a down payment on a home. They can't save to invest in a business, and it's impacting people's wealth. So the average 30-year-old borrower has about $8,000 less in wealth because of their student debt. When it comes to home ownership, more than half of first-time home buyers cite student debt as a barrier. And when it comes to financial thin ice, we hear that Black and Latinx people are more prone to unemployment. especially during times of crisis. So especially during COVID, we heard how Black and Latinx workers were most likely to lose their job or to have reduced hours or wages. And so that impacts people's abilities to pay their student loan debt. And so today's agenda, as I mentioned before, we'll be talking about all of these. So in this section, we'll talk about student loan basics, loan servicers, and where you can find some information regarding your loans. So when it comes to federal loans and private loans, there are two very different sets of rules. So we often hear from borrowers, one of the most asked questions is, how do I know if I have federal loans or private loans? So these are some of the answers that we respond with. If you have federal loans, the details can be found at studentaid.gov. Your loans will have fixed interest rates, and there are several different kinds of repayment plans, which we will talk about later today, as well as options for hardship where you can defer your loan payments. There are loan forgiveness programs such as public service loan forgiveness, which we'll also talk about, and default rehabilitation. When it comes to private loans, it's a little bit more tricky, but you can find your details on credit reports or you can contact your lender. The interest rates are more variable and there are no guaranteed repayment plans, hardship deferments, or default rehabilitation. And then of the federal loans, there are three kinds. There are direct loans, and then there are Perkins loans and federal family education loans, known as FFEL loans. Perkins loans and FFEL loans are older kinds of loans. So if you are looking to go to college or you're a recent graduate, those most likely will not be applying to you. And you can find more information regarding all of this information on studentaid.gov. And so loan servicers. A loan servicer is the company assigned to your loan and they handle your payments. So federal servicers are Mohila, Nelnet, Navient, and Great Lakes, and some private servicers. Navient also deals with private loans as well as Sallie Mae, Wells Fargo, SoFi, and Discover. More recently, we've been hearing a lot in the news updates regarding student loan servicers. There's been a lot of confusion and just questions about who's my loan servicer. Borrowers have heard that their loans are being transferred to other servicers, and they're wondering, what does this mean? So recently, 3 federal student loan servicers, Navient, FedLoan, and Granite State, announced that they will be no longer servicing loans in the near future for the Department of Education. So these loans will be transferred over to other servicers. Approximately 16 million student loan borrowers are impacted. So 35% of all student loan borrowers will be getting a new student loan servicer. And FedLoan Servicing is the company that services federal student loans for PSLF. So what to do next? So the best way to keep track of all of this is to make sure that your address and that your contact information is all up to date, so that once you are alerted, so that you can be reached and be alerted when the transfer has taken place and that you have all the necessary information. You also want to make sure that you open mail and email from your new servicer. It's really important for you to read all of the communications that they provide you with, so that you don't miss out on anything really important that applies to you. And make sure that you save copies of your payment history. Having all of this information is a great way to ensure that all of your info is accurate and that the transfer is complete and that there's nothing wrong with your account. And also make sure that you set a reminder so that you can be sure to log into the new servicer's website to verify your information. So again, if you want to look into your federal loans and find them, you can access this website, studentaid.gov, to find it. And then you can also speak with the loan servicer company to find more information on your federal loans, as well as finding info in the federal database. With private loans, there may also be questions if you don't find your loans on studentaid.gov. It may be an indication that you have a private loan. If you have a cosigner, that's another indication that you have a private loan. You can also check your credit report and you can contact lender, servicers, or a debt collector. Now I'm going to toss it back to Cody or Lindsay to take over the next section.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sabrina. You all are going to see one of the trends, I think, of today's clinic that's very different is that there's a lot of updates to share. Lindsay later is going to discuss updates related to the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. Sabrina, thank you for covering these important updates when it comes to student loan servicing companies. I want to just cover quickly some of the important updates related to COVID-19 relief and its expiration in the coming weeks. So let's go to the next slide here, and I'll give you the basics. So COVID-19 relief for borrowers started in March of 2020, last year. And this was due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And what was passed as far as relief is a suspension of payments. So for people who have federally held student loans, your payments are likely on pause. And also interest has been put on pause as well. There's also been other changes related to debt collection efforts, and I'll get into that momentarily. The big thing right now, though, is that payments, the payment relief is set to end on January 31st. And that means that millions of Americans are going to have to resume payments after this expiration. And this is extremely concerning to us. We just released a survey with our partners at Savvy that found that 9 out of 10 student loan borrowers are not ready to resume payments. So this is going to be a challenging time, and we'll be working through it, but we need borrowers to know about the suspension of payments and interest ending, because we want people to be able to get back into a better situation as quickly as possible and as smoothly as possible. On the next slide, I'll just quickly cover that there was the additional relief for people who were behind on their payments as well. So payments were paused, interest were paused, and on this next slide, I'll also cover the fact that withholdings for defaulted borrowers, meaning your tax and Social Security could be withheld if you were in default, that has been suspended. Borrowers in default were also facing wage garnishments. That has been suspended. And the collection activities like calls and letters and other types of harassment from debt collectors, all of this has been on pause for many student loan borrowers throughout the pandemic. And all of this is set to expire after January 31st. Unfortunately, COVID relief has not been available to everyone with a student loan. And it has been our goal to try to expand this relief to include every American with a student loan. And unfortunately, we haven't been able to do so. But it's important to know, if you have a federal direct loan or any other type of, quote, federally held loan, which means that the Department of Education owns your loan, then you have been receiving COVID-19 relief. You don't have to do anything. This relief has been automatic. So if you've been receiving it, you have the right type of loan. And if you haven't received relief, you almost certainly just don't have the right kind of loan. There are other types of federal loans. One of them, for example, is called a Federal Family Education Loan, or an FFEL loan. Another type is called a Perkins loan. Some of these federal loans are commercially held, which means a private bank or a lender owns the loan. These people have not received full relief. Up until recently, they didn't receive any relief at all. And defaulted loans that are FFEL loans have now actually had interest and debt collections paused. So some of this relief has been expanded, not all of it. So these people that have FFEL loans and Perkins loans are going to still be having made payments since March. And unfortunately, private loans across the table have not received any of this federal relief. If you have a private loan, I hear you. We talk to borrowers every single day. We're extremely frustrated that private student loan borrowers don't receive nearly any of the types of benefits that federal loans do. Now, I'm just going to lay out this timeline because I just want folks to understand what's been going on. It has been quite confusing, and there have been a lot of changes. So as I mentioned, COVID relief for federal student loans started in March of last year. It was set to expire in January, but it was extended to September. At that point, President Biden extended this once more through January. And now we're seeing that payments are set to resume on February 1st, 2022. So we are really approaching this deadline very quickly, and we need borrowers to know what's going to happen in the coming months. There are some other recent updates. I don't have time to get into the details, but each one of these is important. There are people who have been applying for a program called Borrower Defense to Repayment. That's for people who have been defrauded. The process for accessing that relief has been improved. Again, FFEL loans that were in default have now had some relief during the pandemic. Borrowers with disabilities are eligible for student loan discharge. That is now available in a more streamlined process. And as we mentioned, the payment pause extension was extended through February 1, 2022. If you have one of these private loans, my advice is to you is you can still check to see if your private lender is offering any relief on their own. Some companies have decided to create their own programs for distressed borrowers. You should contact your lender directly and speak with them because it will change. Your options will vary depending on what company services or is your lender. All right, so we got the updates out of the way. That is important information, but for many borrowers, they're going to really need to know about repaying their federal student loans because, as I mentioned, on February 1st, we're all going to be repaying our student loans all over again. So we're going to talk about the standard repayment plan. We're going to talk about affordable options. We call them income-driven repayment plans. And I'm going to give you a little bit of tips when it comes to what to do if you fall into default. So when a borrower gets a student loan for the first time and they're set to resume payments, there is a standard option, and that is called the 10-year standard repayment plan. A borrower in this plan is expected to make the same monthly payment every month for 10 years. At the end of that, your student loans are paid off. I wish I could say that most of us will pay off our loans with no problem in 10 years. Unfortunately, that is not the case for most of us on today's call. For those people, there are more affordable options for borrowers who are struggling. Those options are called income-driven repayment. Income-driven repayment makes your monthly payments more affordable because it calculates your monthly payment based on a percentage of your income and your family size. So no longer matters how much student loan debt you have. What matters is how much money you make and how large your family is, and it adjusts your monthly payments to a rate that hopefully will be more affordable and more manageable based on your situation. IDR programs are really helpful for a lot of types of borrowers. There are some borrowers who just have consistently low incomes, and that is not for lack of hard work or career choices. I hear often from social workers who are doing incredible work in childhood development and mental health fields and are just perpetually underpaid for their incredible service. A borrower like that who just for a long period of time cannot afford their monthly payments would benefit from an IDR program. If you've lost your job or have had decreased hours and income due to the COVID-19 pandemic, one of these programs is great for you. And you can lock in a lower payment right now for the next year by enrolling in an IDR program before payments even begin in February. So if you have a lower payment right now, you can contact your loan servicer, contact the Department of Education. You can enroll in one of these programs and just lock in a lower monthly payment for the next year. And even people who've been excluded from COVID-19 relief, so these people that had the wrong type of student loan, they haven't received any relief during the pandemic. If you have one of these other federal loans, you can still enroll in a lower monthly payment through an IDR plan. Now, here's all the federal income-driven repayment plans. I wish we could get into the details of each one of these because there's different qualifying factors, but it's a bit nuanced and it would just take forever. For you, all you need to know is that there are multiple options. On the left here, we have revised pay-as-you-earn, which is the most generous option when it comes to how much your monthly payments are and how long you can be in the program for. And on the right, We have income contingent repayment, or what we call ICR. This is the oldest of the programs. Your monthly payments would be higher and you would be in the program for longer. What matters as far as qualifying for these programs is what type of loan you have and when you got your student loan. I can't get into the details today because it gets quite complicated. So you can go to studentaid.gov, which is the Department of Education's website, and you can learn about each one of these programs and learn how it applies to your personal situation. I show here a repayment example because I think it's hard to understand how these programs work without actually seeing it in action. So this is a borrower who's single, they have one child, and they have student debt that's over $37,000. In a 10-year standard repayment plan, this person would be paying $364 a month. In an income-driven repayment plan, this person could pay as little as $0 per month if they had $0 in income. If they had $25,000 in income per year, they would pay as little as $49. And you can see even at $75,000 in income, a borrower still sees some savings, which can really mean the difference between affording rent, putting food on the table, and supporting your family. So these programs are incredibly powerful. So there are some steps to enrolling in these programs. You have to submit an application. The application is available online at the Department of Education, or you can contact your student loan servicing company. After you do so, you'll be put into a repayment plan, typically within about 30 days. And this is the important part. After you enroll and are put in the plan, you have to recertify your income every 12 months if you want to stay in the program. So we always tell folks, put it on your calendar, maybe 11 months from now, so you don't miss your deadline. And what you'll do is you'll just share what your most recent yearly income was, and your payments will be adjusted accordingly. If you fail to meet your deadline, it's okay. You can still get back in the program. But what will happen is your monthly payment for the month will go back to normal, which will be higher typically. You will see your interest capitalized, which means your balance on your loan account increases. So there are some consequences, but it's not the end of the world. If you need to get back into the program, you still can. Whenever we talk about the federal programs, there's another side to it we have to cover, which is letting folks know that there are scams out there. So there are people who send out letters, they email, they do social media blasts. I get phone calls all the time. And the scam typically involves someone urging a borrower to consolidate their loans, apply for loan forgiveness, or frankly, the company promises something that's just too good to be true. You'll often hear them say, you know, immediate loan forgiveness here, there's a deadline approaching. They'll use all these really urgent terms to try to push people into programs. At the end of the day, these companies typically charge you tons of money to do what you could do for free yourself at the Department of Education's website. So we put this here because we want people to be aware and so that they can empower themselves to take action for free as opposed to falling into one of these debt relief scams. Many people who fall for these scams or have been taken advantage of by their student loan servicer want to take action. You can do so by submitting a complaint at what we call the Department of Education's Student Loan Ombudsman's Office. The current ombudsman is Bonnie Luttrell. She was actually on the summit earlier today talking about these recent updates. She's a former advocate, someone who really wants to see the best outcomes for student loan borrowers. So you can reach out to the ombudsman's group and they will actually help you take action and resolve issues that you have on your account. And lastly, student loan default. This is a whole nother area. A student loan default is when someone is over 270 days past due on their account. When someone falls into student loan default, what that can mean is that you have huge fees added to your account. It means you can't get financial aid anymore. It can even prevent you from getting certain jobs. So student loan default is really a big deal, but for someone who falls into default, there are ways to get out of it. So there is a program, it's called Loan Default Rehabilitation. It's offered through the Department of Education. It's one of these benefits that's offered to a federal student loan. And so there are options. If you are a borrower in default, I encourage you to go to the Department of Education's website and learn more. This particular program, also a bit complicated, so we don't have time to get into the details today, but just know you have rights, you have options, and you can get back into a good place when it comes to your student loan accounts. You can skip right over this, Sabrina. All right, so we've covered the important stuff. In my opinion, income-driven repayment programs are the most effective tool that a borrower has to make their student loan payments more affordable. There are other options that the government offers. We have options like extended repayment, which extends the length of your repayment schedule and lowers your monthly payment. We have graduated repayment, which starts your monthly payments off low and increases them over time. We have a combination of the two called extended graduated repayment. And then there are some other familiar terms like forbearance and deferment, which are pauses on your account, and consolidation, which can combine your accounts and provide some minor benefits. All of these exist. I want you to know about them. We're not covering them today because they're not as powerful or as effective as the income-driven repayment plans are. So here's your checklist. If you want to learn about repayment plans that work best for you, we certainly encourage you to empower yourself. When folks know their rights and their options, they will do better at picking the choices that are best for them. You can learn about it at studentaid.gov. Checklist number 2, submit your IDR application. Do it online if you can. It should take no longer than 10 or 15 minutes. So you can do it yourself. And number 3, recertify your income next year. Don't forget, put it on your calendar, mark it so you don't miss your deadline. And I'm just going to flag here, we're going to talk about it later, but you can also use the tool that our partners at Savvy created, because that tool helps streamline the application process, makes it easier, and also makes sure that folks can monitor their accounts so they don't miss their deadlines, fall through the cracks, and have any other errors that happen throughout the application process. So we'll look forward to hearing more about that later, but that's also an option if you want to enroll in one of these programs. So here's a quick FAQ. Someone asked, what should I do if my income or family size changes before the recertification deadline? The good news is you can actually change your income and lower your monthly payments at any time. So borrowers that have lost their job during the pandemic could recertify their income right then and there and lower their monthly payment. That can happen at any time during your repayment journey. Folks often ask us, if I have my debt forgiven at the end of one of these programs, will I have to pay taxes? That may be the case. If you complete an income-driven repayment program, which takes 20 or 25 years, there could be a tax implication. We're just now seeing folks receive student loan forgiveness by completing these programs for the first time over the last few years. So this is still kind of an open-ended question, but as the law is written, you may pay taxes on it. And another person asked, what other documentation can I submit for my income? We get this question all the time. If you have alternate documentation, such as like a pay stub or some other proof of income, it can be used to help lower your monthly payment. So we definitely hear from folks that have unique employment situations where it's less simple. They're proving their income's less simple. So there are other ways to lower your monthly payments, and we can always work with you to help you understand that. Cool. Well, before we go on to any of the other sections, maybe now's a good time to just take a quick moment and address some of the questions that have already come in. And I already see a few great ones here. Maria was asking, is there any opportunity to have their student loans forgiven if you've been paying your student loans for a long time? We get this question all the time from older borrowers and retirees. Lindsay, if you're on, do you want to talk about if there are any options for folks, kind of like a statute of limitations when it comes to federal student loans?
Sure. Thanks, Cody. So there are a couple different ways to have your loans forgiven. And I'm actually about to talk in the next section about a program called Public Service Loan Forgiveness, which forgives the entirety of your loan balance after you've essentially worked in public service for 10 years. But let's say you aren't a public servant, perhaps. You are also able to have your loans forgiven on an income-driven repayment plan after you've been making those payments for the allotted time, usually 20 or 25 years. Your loans can then be forgiven after you've made payments for those 20 to 25 years. However, that forgiveness is considered taxable income. So what many people refer to as sort of a tax bomb that could be waiting for you after making those payments. So that's sort of the two biggest ways I would say are income-driven repayment or a big program like public service loan forgiveness. There are also a lot of other state-based and occupation-based forgiveness programs, probably hundreds out there. And so we're happy to help if you're curious and learning more. Reach out to Cody or myself. We're happy to help you explore those. But I would say those are sort of probably the biggest ways of pursuing forgiveness.
Great. I want to take a moment to answer Carmen's question or address her statement here. Carmen says it's unfair that the IDR program does not look at rent and other expenses, especially when you live in California. Carmen, I hear you 1000%. We talk about these income-driven repayment plans because they're often the best choice for borrowers who need to lower their monthly payment, but the programs are not perfect by any means. And so we hear from people in expensive states like California, New York, and Florida, Texas, some of these places where it can cost a lot to live in certain areas. And because it costs a lot to live in certain areas, it also means that their income is typically generally higher. That doesn't mean that they have a more, stable financial situation because the cost of living is so high. So what happens for many of these borrowers is their income increases. The IDR program expects them to pay more into the program, but all of these extra costs because of the living situation really makes the program ineffective for these borrowers. It's a real problem. Also, you addressed it. The program does not consider other expenses. So we hear from a lot of borrowers who are facing, huge healthcare challenges or other expenses that are really taking up a huge chunk of their income, and it's not included in their calculation. All of these things are opportunities for advocacy. They're issues that we bring up in front of lawmakers and policymakers all the time. And when it comes to hopefully fixing these programs, these are things we should consider to improve them and strengthen the programs moving forward. All right, I'm gonna take one more question in this segment, and then I want to give Lindsay time to talk about these other programs. We'll try to answer some more questions at the end as well. A question from Jerry was about loan consolidation. I didn't get to go into the details here, but Jerry asks, where can I find help consolidating my student loans? And Jerry also adds that they don't know which loans that they should include or not include. Lindsay, I know that's a tough question, but maybe you could just give some general guidance as far as what loan consolidation is for and the pros and cons of doing so.
Sure, that's a great question. And whenever someone brings up consolidation, I always get a little bit nervous because it is something that is complicated and it can have sort of irreversible consequences when consolidating. So there are a few different reasons why you'd want to consolidate. First, if you have an older loan type like a FFEL loan that is ineligible for, let's say, a program like public service loan forgiveness, you would need to consolidate that loan in order to become eligible and start accumulating eligible credits. Another reason why you might consolidate is to get out of default. It's sort of a get out of jail free card. It will immediately bring your loans out of default without having to go through a 9-month rehabilitation process. The thing about consolidation is you can only do it once. So for something like default, if you've consolidated already, you can't use that again. Here's what I would say, and we are happy to help you with our expert support team here at Savvy because it is something that's complicated. Sometimes you might only want to consolidate some of your loans and not all of them because it could reset your accounts towards IDR or public service loan forgiveness. So I would highly recommend talking with an expert, and we're going to put our support contact information in the chat before the end of the session, and you can reach out to us and we'll be able to work with you more closely because I would say it is something you're going to want to have that conversation, and we can definitely help you with that.
Great. Well, keep the questions coming, guys. We want to address as many as we can while we're here. But with that, I will pass it to Lindsay and let her, or Ian, the team at Savvy, and let them jump into loan forgiveness programs.
Great, thanks, Cody. So I'm going to walk through one of the biggest loan forgiveness programs out there called Public Service Loan Forgiveness. Talk about sort of the general application process, eligibility requirements, how to get started, and discuss some of the recent policy updates and expansion to the program that hopefully make more borrowers eligible to be able to benefit from this forgiveness. Then we're going to talk about some additional sort of forgiveness programs that are out there before I pass it over to my colleague Ian, who's going to talk to you about the free Savvy platform that you'll be able to use to help you with anything like public service loan forgiveness. So to recap on this next slide about public service loan forgiveness, essentially it is full forgiveness on the remainder of your loan balance, whatever that may be, $10,000, $500,000, it doesn't matter, after you have made 120 qualifying payments. And I say that in air quotes because the devil's really in the details here as far as what constitutes a qualifying payment. And we're going to go into that in more detail in a little bit. But essentially, that's why people say 10 years. But the important thing to remember is that these 120 payments do not need to be consecutive. They just need to be cumulative. I'll repeat that. They don't need to be consecutive. They just need to be cumulative. So let's say you worked for a couple of years in the public sector, maybe gained 50 credits towards the 120 you need. And then maybe you had to take a year off from work or you went into the private sector. Nothing happens to those credits. They just pause. And then let's say you resume your eligibility in the future, you can resume continuing to accumulate credits. All right, so you just need to reach 120 total. So sometimes that 10 years, it often takes borrowers perhaps longer. But after you do make those 120 payments, all of your debt can be forgiven tax-free. So there are no tax implications associated with this program. So on this next slide, one of the ways to really sort of maximize your benefits around public service loan forgiveness is by minimizing your monthly payment, hopefully on something like an income-driven repayment plan, while maximizing your ultimate forgiveness through public service loan forgiveness. So that's really how we try to help borrowers to maximize their benefit here, keeping that monthly payment as low as possible, like on an income-driven repayment plan, and hopefully you can get as much forgiven after those 10 years worth of payments. So let's dig into sort of the details a little bit more here. So this is sort of a basics overview around public service loan forgiveness. Some questions you can ask yourself to determine, do I qualify for this program? So first and foremost, are you paying back a federal direct loan? Okay, that's one. It's important to know your loan type when thinking about public service loan forgiveness. Next, you want to think about, does your employer qualify? Okay, and we're going to talk about which employers qualify and which don't in a second. Are you enrolled in a qualifying repayment plan? These are sort of the three questions: your loan type, your employment, and your repayment plan. All right, those are sort of the three things you want to think about when it comes to making qualifying payments. After that, as far as actually applying and sort of enrolling in this program, you're going to want to submit documentation. And it doesn't have to be after the 10 years. Actually, I would encourage borrowers to submit it within your first year of working in public service, if possible. It's what's called a public service loan forgiveness employment certification form. It's actually the same form that is the application. This is the one and only form that you'll need to submit for public service loan forgiveness. It's not required to submit every year, but it's highly encouraged by the Department of Education that borrowers submit this every year or when they change employers to basically certify the past 12 months worth of credits. So that's certifying that you worked for a qualifying employer, you made payments during that time. Great, that's 12 credits. 12 credits towards that 120. You're sort of inching 12 credits over 12 credits, right, until you reach the 120. And that's when you'll submit your final employment certification form. And that's essentially how you get forgiveness. All right. So about 5 or 6 weeks ago, there was a huge overhaul to the public service loan forgiveness program. And this has been sort of long waited and came, to not, I would say pleasant surprise, but we were really excited to be able to hear this news and share with a lot of borrowers. So the promise of the public service loan forgiveness program was that if you make payments for 10 years, you can have your loans forgiven if you're a public servant. What we found is that so many borrowers were either rejected because of one technicality or another, their loan type, their repayment plan. And so the promise really didn't live up to itself. And so hopefully these overhauls are a step in the right direction to try to do just that. So the Department of Ed announced what they're calling a PSLF waiver for a limited period of time from now until next October 31st, 2022, in which they are expanding the eligibility requirements around public service loan forgiveness. And I'm going to go into more detail on that in a second. They're also going to be reviewing previously denied public service loan forgiveness applications. So if you've been previously denied from this program, now is your opportunity to have that reviewed. They're also going to be automatically providing PSLF credits for military service members and federal employees using federal data matches. So this is a great step in the right direction. On this next slide, I'm going to sort of go through what does qualify for PSLF as far as loans, employer, and repayment plans. So loans, we've got all of the direct loan types: direct subsidized, unsubsidized, doesn't matter, direct grad plus, direct parent plus, and direct consolidated loans. As far as employers go, all levels of government, federal, state, local, or tribal, any 501c3 non-for-profit, and some other critical public service areas. Lastly, as far as repayment plan, any type of standard repayment plan or income-driven repayment plan. Now on this next slide, previously what did not qualify were these older type of loans, all right? So I'm going to talk sort of through here what used to not qualify before this overhaul and now does qualify. So previously, if you had a FFEL loan, FFEL loan, Federal Family Education Loan, Perkins loans, those loans, payments made on those loans did not qualify for public service loan forgiveness. Now they are eligible to qualify during this waiver period. Previously, that did not qualify. Loans in default and private student loans, those still do not qualify. Employer, government contractors, labor unions, 501c4, and religious instruction, again, still do not qualify for this program. Repayment plans now do qualify. This slide's a bit confusing. Sorry, guys. Extended repayment, graduated, extended graduated, and deferment, forbearance, and default. These all now do qualify. So I'll sort of recap this here. Basically, if you've made 120 payments, okay, on your loans, regardless of your loan type, as long as it's not private, regardless of your loan type, if you made 120 payments, regardless of your repayment plan, you're eligible probably for immediate forgiveness. Let's say you haven't made 120 payments. That's fine. You could still be eligible to take advantage of this waiver. Again, if you've made payments when you had an older loan type or you were on a different repayment plan, those can all count now. So I know it's a bit confusing. The program was confusing to begin with, but we're going to show you how the Savvy tool in a little bit can help you to sort of walk through some of those things. So on these next slides, I'm kind of just going to run through what you should be doing next steps wise as far as thinking about your own situation and your eligibility. So I'm going to run through a couple different of these scenarios. So the first thing you want to do is determine what type of loan you have. You can do this by going to studentaid.gov. You can click the My Aid section of that page, scroll down to see your loan breakdown. You're going to find a list of all the federal loans that you have, even if it's been consolidated. If you see words direct or a loan that begins with the word direct, that means you've got a direct loan. If it says FFEL, it means you've got a FFEL loan. Perkins, you get the gist here. So that's a way to determine what type of loan you have, which is going to sort of determine what actions you'd need to take next. On this next slide, so let's say you have at least one federal loan and it's not direct, okay? It is a FFEL or a Perkins loan. What you're going to need to do is consolidate that loan. You're going to need to submit that consolidation application before October 31st of next year. And then you're going to need to submit an employment certification form. All right, so that's sort of how you get this process started. You can check your employer's eligibility by going to studentaid.gov/PSLF. You can also use the Savvy tool that we're going to talk about in a second. On this next slide, let's say you have direct loans and some employment certified. You likely have Fed loan as your servicer already if you've done this, if you've certified your employment. If you already have direct loans and you've certified some of your employment, then you should be awarded automatically any additional payments that you might have been eligible for. So Fed loans should have been contacting you, or you might have received something from FSA, Federal Student Aid. You're going to want to look out for an email about these additional payments counting. So make sure your contact information is up to date, but otherwise you shouldn't need to take any other action. Let's say you have direct loans, okay, but you haven't submitted anything. You haven't applied for anything. Well, the first thing you're going to want to do is submit this employment certification form, okay? That's basically going to get the process started in certifying that you indeed worked for a qualifying employer during the time that you were making payments. Again, you can do this through the tool at studentaid.gov/PSLF. I would sort of a word of warning here, because the Department of Ed is anticipating a large influx of applicants due to this big announcement, you might see some delays in processing. So be patient, but you're going to want to monitor that. And anything that sort of, I would say, goes past a month, you might want to escalate through the Ombudsman, or we're happy to help you here at Student Debt Crisis and Savvy. Again, you must submit those by October 31st of next year in order to have any potential retroactive payments counted. Okay, let's say you tried to certify your employment at one point, but were denied or rejected. You are able to resubmit that, and we highly encourage that you do, to potentially have it re-reviewed and receive credit towards forgiveness. Again, you can find which employers are eligible through the Department of Education tool, the PSLF help tool. And again, you know, the eligibility did not change for employer types. All right, so it's still got to be a government organization at any level or a non-for-profit 501c3. So that didn't change through this waiver. It's just around loan type and repayment plan. But again, if you had any issues, please feel free to reach out to us. All right, just really briefly on teacher loan forgiveness, because I know we're running short on time here. Teacher loan forgiveness is another type of forgiveness program for highly qualified teachers working in a Title I school district for school. You are either eligible for a minimum of $5,000 or maximum of $17,500 if you teach 5 consecutive years full-time in a Title I or low-income school or education agency. There are different sort of qualifications, as you can see here. So basically, if you're full-time teaching elementary or secondary, you get a minimum of $5,000. If you teach STEM or special education, you get $17,500. So we're happy to provide more information on teacher loan forgiveness for anyone who might be interested, but that's 5 consecutive years. Last but not least, just want to touch on some other types of forgiveness, cancellation, and discharge. So I'm not going to go into detail on these, but here are a few of the other programs that are out there. And if you want more information about any, feel free to let us know in the chat. So there's total and permanent disability discharge for borrowers who are disabled and are able to receive full forgiveness on their loans, closed school discharged, defense to repayment, false certification of eligibility, death discharged. If you die, your loans are forgiven. That sounds morbid, but it's true. And unpaid refund. So these are just a couple of different types of forgiveness and cancellation that are out there and available to federal student loan borrowers. All right, so to wrap things up here before I turn it over to Ian, just a quick checklist of what you would need to know around forgiveness here. So first and foremost, you want to confirm your loan type, that you have a qualifying loan. Then you're going to want to make sure you're enrolled in a qualifying repayment plan. Again, those have expanded over the past year. You're going to want to verify your employer qualification by submitting that employment certification form. And then you're going to want to continue working full-time up until those 120 payments. So for more information, we're going to drop this link in the chat, but we can show you how to use our tool to be able to determine all of this. And we actually help you with all the paperwork so that you don't have to do it on your own, which is great because I know how complicated and burdensome this can be. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Ian, who is going to talk to you about an absolutely free tool that you are all able to use, brought to you by Savvy, to help navigate repayment as well as programs like public service loan forgiveness. Ian, do we have you?
Yes, thanks, Lindsay.
Thank you.
I know we have just a couple minutes left, so I'll try to be quick so we have time for questions as well at the end as needed. But like Lindsay said, Savvy is a company and an online tool. Here working with all the advocates at Student Debt Crisis and Next Gen Policy today. So we are based in DC and have an online service that goes through and checks all of these qualifications, all these rules, all these regulations for you digitally, 100% free. You don't fix your car by yourself when it has issues. You don't do your taxes by yourself when the IRS calls. And your student loans, they've got to be so complex. It's the same way. So that is what we are here to help with. If we go to the next slide, just a little bit more about us as an organization, since you may not be as familiar with our company. We are a public benefit company, which in short means that we exist to help the public good. Our work together here is founded by grants and also our just public advocacy arm of our organization. So that is, why it's no cost to you. I know that's a question that comes up a lot. But in short, like I said, we're an online tool and a whole team of student loan experts. We were founded by student loan experts that came from the same policy and advocacy space, working on the Obama campaign, founding nonprofits, testifying to Congress, meetings with the White House, everything of that jazz. And that's how they got to know so deeply, right, all of the intricate issues and problems with student loan debt. And policies really need to be passed, to make things better, make things change for borrowers, but they can take a long time. So in the interim, we kind of switched focuses about 5 years ago and made the online tool you see here. So everything that Lindsay and Cody and Sabrina and team ran through of all these confusing rules, it will let you know what you're eligible for, what you're not, what your next steps are that you need to take. So if you're looking to take advantage of this public service loan forgiveness time period, it'll tell you what you need to do there in terms of consolidating or submitting new paperwork. We then help you submit that paperwork all digitally for you. Again, think like an online tax software that takes care of all of that heavy lifting for you. Every year there is paperwork, like they've noted, that you need to do to stay enrolled in this program. Every year we make sure that you're at an eligible nonprofit or that your income is the same, to keep those reduced monthly payments, keep them affordable and adjusted to your current life. We help with that all for free in filing those forms. And additionally, being here in DC, we're always able to also monitor for new policy changes. When the payment pause, has been extended multiple times, anyone that had a Savvy account knew that information within the hour. I still to this day have not received a letter from FedLoan for my servicer about that change. So just one example there for you as well. But if we keep going here, I think we have just some examples of what the tool looks like. So there's no surprises if you choose to get started in going with that. We will put the link in the chat here for this, so you can bookmark it and come back to it to make your account. But it is app.bysavvy.com/register/borrowers. And like I said, this is a 100% free service, paid for by grants and our Public Good Foundation here working together. It's an account that will always be yours, will always be free and available as part of attending this event today. So once you get signed up, just some of those couple of quick steps, we're going to go ahead and hit continue application. At this point, it will walk you through a kind of questionnaire that looks, maybe similar, like I said, to other online banking or tax form systems that you've used before. Everything that we asked you questions about is designed to save you more money. So questions like how many dependents you have, for example, saves you $50 per month on your income-driven repayment plan per dependent. So there's all sorts of kind of little, I don't want to say loopholes, but little tricks and tidbits in these programs that we help you uncover to be able to find savings. Most people that work with Savvy in Student Debt Crisis Together save, I want to say, about $300 per month on their income-driven repayment plan, which, really doing that on your own, your servicer was making you pay more for when you did not need to. So that is kind of the cost of bad servicing and being forced to trust those federal servicers. If we keep going here, I think there's just some more examples. Yeah, again, you see a live estimate through the whole step here. So in this example, we've gotten that monthly payment down to $177 a month, which is a little bit more affordable than where it started. Going through the next screens, you'll put in your income, where you work, some other simple questions, knowing if you're eligible for forgiveness or not, and then we will sync our loans. So that's the very cool part of the tool. It draws a secure, safe connection between your loan servicer. So FedLoan, Navient, and all those other names that Sabrina ran through. It draws a safe connection so we can see, how many payments you've made, what the interest rate is. Has FedLoan been doing their job correctly? All of those details are what we get kind of that front row insight to, and can tell you on this last slide what the best next steps are for you. If you should enroll in a certain plan, if you are eligible for forgiveness, whatever that may be for your unique student loan system. We search 150 different plan options locally and federally for you to find the best one. Going ahead and hitting select and submit, you're welcome to do that and keep rolling. That'll help you file the paperwork and get set up for your best next step. Otherwise, you're always welcome to hit contact support. They are through the whole tool as you need, whether that's sending a message, checking out the help center, sending them an email, etc. Those are always resources you have available to you that way. All right, I know we're just at time here, so happy to take any questions or toss that back over to you, Sam, to help coordinate.
Thank you, Ian, and thanks everyone at Savvy and Student Debt Crisis. Just jumping in here real quick, this is the official end time, unfortunately, for the Student Debt Summit. But for those of you, who are in the Zoom webinar with us right now, we will continue answering your questions. So don't go anywhere if you can stay on. But for everyone else who needs to jump off, thank you so much for joining all of us today. Thank you to everyone for tuning into our Free My Future Student Debt Summit, the third annual this year. And for those who registered, please keep a lookout in your inbox for links to the summit videos and resources. Everyone is able to access these, the summit videos as well at our YouTube channel. That's Next Gen Policy on YouTube. You can visit our website as well at nextgenpolicy.org/freemyfuture. And as always, find us on Twitter and Facebook for updates on student loans and the latest advocacy actions that you can take. So thank you again. Free My Future 2021 is a great success to you all. Thanks to you all. So thanks everyone again. But we will be sticking around for everyone else still on the webinar to take questions.